Janet Harrell was a small-town girl.
Very friendly. She was always kind.
Raised by a devout Christian family.
You can't say anything bad about that family.
Who became an upstanding member of her congregation.
They were in our church, and we became friends with them.
But then, a bizarre kidnapping.
Somebody was attacking our husband.
He had a taser.
And a freak accident.
She just didn't even see me. Just plowed into the back of my car.
Landed the church-going good girl in some serious trouble.
Most people were really shocked.
That is just something you'll never forget.
But was she a criminal mastermind?
We were led to believe that this crime was orchestrated by Miss Harrell.
Or merely the victim of circumstance.
I'm thinking to myself, this girl had absolutely no knowledge of what happened.
Ahoskie, North Carolina, October 4th, 2007. Thick early morning fog blanketed this small town of 5,000 near the Outer Banks.
We are a very rural area. Everybody knows everybody.
You can't find a better place in the world to grow up. And it's still a safe place.
At least it normally was. But that foggy Thursday morning, something was going on outside the home of 33-year-old Brad Smithwick and his wife, Cindy.
The dogs were just going crazy.
Still in bed when the dogs woke her, Cindy called for her husband, who was already up.
She said, maybe I can get Brad to go, put the shock collars on the dogs so they can quiet down.
But when she got up, Cindy quickly realized that Brad was already outside and right in the middle of the disturbance.
She had out on her front porch and I seen Brad struggling with somebody.
It was a male subject in all black.
And as Cindy watched in horror, the mysterious man in black pulled a weapon.
He had a taser.
And when he used it on Brad...
He went down immediately, hit the pavement, that hollow sound. His nose was gushing blood.
Once Brad was down, the assailant knelt over him.
The suspect was tying Mrs. Smithwick's hands behind his back.
And he was so intent on his work that in the fog and the darkness, Brad's assailant didn't see Cindy watching from the porch. That is, not until she screamed her husband's name.
That's when the suspect looked up at her. They looked at each other. She just took off.
Cindy ran inside for the phone.
Cindy called in to the Hosky Police Department that somebody was attacking her husband.
However, even as Cindy was on the phone, she heard Brad's truck start up and tear out of the driveway. And by the time Cindy put down the phone and ran to the door, the mysterious attacker was gone, and so was her husband.
He was kidnapped.
However, Brad's kidnapper had left some tantalizing clues behind.
When a taser is deployed, it shoots out little confetti dots all over the place.
And to connect those dots, the police would need to ask some hard questions about Brad's first marriage and the mother of his 2 children, Janet Harrell. Born in 1974, Janet Harrell grew up in Edenton, North Carolina, a quaint colonial town on the coast, about 30 miles from Ahoskie.
It has been called the most beautiful town in the South.
Janet had been raised in a large, devout Christian family.
The Harrell family. This is a large family of farmers. Can't find anybody in the community who say anything bad about that family.
And as a child, the same went for Janet.
She's very bubbly, very outgoing, very friendly.
She was a great girl. She was very friendly. She was always kind.
And she had a beautiful voice. Janet sang in the church choir and in a Christian quartet with 3 other girls.
They were really good, so whenever they were seen locally, we would go and listen to them.
Since Janet appeared to be everything a good church-going girl ought to be, it was quite a shock when the 17-year-old got pregnant and dropped out of high school. And when she met Brad Smithwick in 1994, she was a 20-year-old single mom, living on her own and struggling to get by. Born the same year as Janet, Brad had a carefree childhood growing up in the nearby town of Windsor.
He was very outgoing. He loved to laugh and joke.
But he also had a serious side. Even as a small child, he had dreamed of joining the military, a dream he made reality at the first opportunity.
He joined the Marines right out of high school. He graduated on Friday and left for boot camp on Sunday.
He saw action in Somalia, and he was involved, I think, some real heavy-duty stuff.
Stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, he met Janet while on leave.
Brad had friends that he would hang out with when he came home, and he actually met Janet with a group of girls and boys just out in a parking lot somewhere in Eatonton, North Carolina, and they just started talking.
Janet was immediately attracted to the handsome young Marine.
He was athletic, big stocky guy. He was a man's man.
Brad was just as taken with Janet, although when he brought his new girlfriend home to meet the family, his mother wasn't as impressed.
I guess you'd say when I saw her, I just didn't really have a very good feeling. And I can't explain it because I've never felt like that about anybody.
Brad's mother may have had doubts, but he didn't. After 2 years of dating, the couple married in 1996. And despite Connie Smithwick's misgivings, their first few years were happy ones.
They were in our church, and we became friends with them. They would come to our house and eat.
In 1997, Janet gave birth to the couple's first child together, a daughter.
Janet had a wonderful reputation for being a good wife and a good mother.
A son followed a year later.
He was really the baby of the family.
With 3 young children at home, Brad left the Marines in 2000 and took a job at Nucor Steel.
Working at Nucor was a tough job. They manufacture steel plate. It's a very demanding job, and to work that and be a husband, be a father, it takes a lot of dedication.
He was a loving husband, a loving father, supported his family, hard worker, and was just really into the family life.
But as the years went on, Brad's mother noticed a change in her son.
He wasn't himself at all. He was just real quiet and withdrawn.
And according to his mother, the reason was Janet.
Well, I could just tell by Brad's actions when they were together, things were not good at all. She had completely changed, and he couldn't do anything to satisfy her.
Brad was determined to try, though.
Brad was a very strong Christian, and he didn't believe in divorce. He wanted them to try to work it out. And he tried to talk to Janet about getting marriage counseling.
However, by 2004, their 8-year marriage was in serious trouble.
They were sleeping in separate ends of the house and that type of thing. They were on the verge of a divorce, and it was just a matter of time.
It just went from bad to worse.
And by May of 2005, their marriage was over.
He finally ended up moving out of the house.
And when Brad filed for divorce, Janet retained primary custody of the kids.
The judge told him that because he was living at home with his parents and not married, that he could not have full custody of the children, that he could still get them every other weekend.
After the divorce, Janet moved on. By 2006, she even had a new man in her life, a Kitty Hawk, North Carolina police officer named Ray Jadel. Janet had known Ray longer than Brad, since she was a teenager.
I've known Janet since I first moved to North Carolina back in 1990. I met her through a mutual friend at a church that I was going to in Eatonton.
But the old friends had lost touch when Ray spent several years working overseas for private security firms in war-torn countries like Iraq and Kosovo.
He did close protection security, which means dignitaries and people who needed close protection.
And during his last tour in Iraq, Janet was suddenly back in his life.
My mother was on Facebook chatting with people, and somehow they linked up on the net, and she asked for my email address.
The two traded emails until he returned stateside.
I had just gotten the position as a police officer in Kitty Hawk.
And before too long, the two old friends had become a couple.
It took about 5 or 6 months before they became more than just friends.
And at the same time, her ex-husband Brad had found someone as well.
Her and I didn't actually start dating until after Brad had gotten onto some internet dating service and started dating his future wife.
He actually met Cindy on eHarmony.com. They had gotten real close.
So close that in February of 2007, 2 years after his split from Janet, Brad and Cindy married.
He really loved Cindy and was drawn to her very quickly.
Janet had moved on, and now it seemed Brad had too. But a bizarre kidnapping 8 months into his new marriage would leave the authorities wondering, had they truly been able to let go? Coming up, after Brad's abduction, suspicion turns to his ex-wife.
That was my very first thought, that Janet had done something.
And a traffic accident provides a bizarre clue.
He looked in the rearview mirror, and he merely had time to brace for impact.
Ahoskie, North Carolina, October 4th, 2007. It was a little after 6 a.m. when Cindy Smithwick called 911 and reported that a mysterious man in black had just abducted her husband, Brad. And by the time the police reached the scene, both Cindy's husband and the kidnapper were gone.
In the driveway, it was like 2 pools of blood.
That wasn't all that had been left behind, however. In addition to the blood, the driveway was scattered with tiny metal dots, a clear indication that Brad had been tased by his abductor.
Each taser cartridge has what we call taser confetti. When the taser cartridge is deployed, it shoots out the confetti onto the ground.
The fact that Brad's attacker had used a taser was a hopeful sign for the police.
He could be still living.
But could the authorities catch the kidnapper in time? Other than the fact that he had apparently stolen Brad's trunk, Cindy couldn't give the police much more information about the mysterious man in black.
She was able to give a direction of travel.
That wasn't all Cindy told the police, though. Asked who might have reason to harm her husband, she had a ready answer. His ex-wife, Janet Harrell. According to what Cindy told the police, soon after their marriage, Brad decided to try and get full custody of his children.
He let her know up front that his children were the most important thing to him.
And when Brad's challenge went to court in the summer of 2007, Janet suddenly had a fight on her hands.
Allegations were made about things not being quite on the up and up with Janet with her lifestyle,
including allegations that during their marriage, the devout, church-going Janet had affairs with other men.
He said she has been living 2 different lives. The people at church know her one way, I know her another way.
Whatever the truth of Brad's allegations about Janet's infidelity, the possibility that Janet hadn't been the upstanding wife and mother she appeared was enough to sway the judge. To Janet's dismay, he granted Brad primary custody of the children.
She was upset about Brad getting custody of the children.
But was she upset enough to orchestrate his kidnapping? Brad's wife and his mother had no doubts.
That was my very first thought, that Janet had done something to him.
Because Brad, at least according to his mother, had expected Janet to do something drastic.
She's going to be so mad, she's going to either kill me or have me killed.
Of course, Brad's assailant had used a taser, which not only led the police to hope he was still alive, it offered a crucial clue.
Each piece of confetti has a serial number on it, which comes back to that cartridge. Every cartridge has its own serial number.
In addition to tracking down the taser, the police also searched for his missing pickup truck.
Communications published a BOLO, and by that I mean be on the lookout. for a gray and colored Dodge truck, wanted in connection to an abduction.
Although when Trooper Kevin Briggs got the radio call informing him of the kidnapping, he was already en route to another emergency. The foggy morning had led to a 3-car accident on the Chowan River Bridge, about 30 miles from Ahoskie.
The collision was actually just a few miles away from me.
Briggs kept his eyes open, but there was no sign of a Dodge pickup. And when he reached the bridge, he discovered that one of the people involved in the 3-car accident was a fellow officer, 38-year-old Ray Jadel.
Being in the law enforcement community, we often interact, whether it be backing each other up on vehicle stops or routine calls, or merely eating together at local restaurants.
At the scene, Ray told Briggs that he had been driving slowly across the bridge in the fog when another motorist came up behind him, fast.
He looked in the rearview mirror. What he told me at that point was he merely had time to brace for impact, and that was it.
She hit the back of the car so hard that the trunk popped open.
Then, after hitting him, the driver also managed to hit an oncoming car.
She rear-ended Jeddle's car and then came into my lane.
Incredibly, Ray Jadel, Jackie Mumma, and the driver of the 3rd car, a woman named Sally Quinn, had all escaped without injury.
We got out of the cars, he came out, he checked with both of us to be sure we were okay.
Then, according to what Jackie told Trooper Briggs, Ray had started acting strangely.
He went back to his car. He stayed around the trunk of his car, held it down. He was just very concerned about keeping that trunk closed.
But Briggs dismissed Jackie's concerns.
I didn't know how to take it. I didn't necessarily think it was anything of a criminal nature.
Although he had to admit, Ray did seem awfully anxious to get his car off the bridge.
Once the first wrecker arrived, he actually hollered to me asking if his vehicle could be moved first.
Not that Briggs thought much of Ray's request.
I took it more from the perspective of I'm a law enforcement as well. Look after me.
In fact, when the tow truck finally did hook up to Ray's Lincoln,
I offered to give Ray Jadel a ride.
Ray declined the offer, however.
He was emphatic that no, I'll call my girlfriend.
But first, he would make sure his car got to the wrecker's yard.
I drove away with the wrecker driver, who had towed my vehicle off the bridge.
By the time Ray left the accident scene, the entire area was crawling with patrol cars. The high-priority search for Brad Smithwick's stolen pickup had expanded more than 30 miles from the scene of his abduction and had reached the area where Trooper Briggs was finishing his routine accident report.
In the course of my collision investigation, another trooper actually came and was stationary in the median just north of the Chowan River Bridge, there again looking for the Dodge truck occupied by an unknown assailant.
Although by then, his assailant's identity wasn't entirely unknown. Running the serial number of the taser confetti had produced a surprising clue.
When that serial number was ran, it came back to Kitty Hawk Police Department.
At the Chowan River Bridge, Trooper Briggs was just finishing up the accident report when his supervisor contacted him with the shocking news.
He basically informed me, you listen and you listen good. We've developed a suspect in this abduction, and that suspect is a law enforcement officer.
And as soon as his supervisor said it, Trooper Briggs made the connection.
At that point, I made a spontaneous utterance of Ray Jadel.
Kitty Hawk Police, Ray Jadel's anxiety about keeping his trunk closed, and his urgent need to get off the bridge. It all made sense. As soon as he got off the radio with his supervisor, Briggs called the body shop where Ray's car had been towed.
I was trying to be very vague with my conversation, not knowing who was present, if Mr. Jadel was still with him, or if he had already departed.
Unfortunately, Ray had already left, but not before cleaning out the back of the Lincoln.
Somebody pulled up in another car to get all the stuff out of it. I believe it was a woman. They backed the car up, bumper to bumper with the Lincoln that was wrecked. Just kind of rolled something out the back of it.
Just like Trooper Briggs at the bridge, the mechanic hadn't thought much of it at the time.
Everything seemed normal. He could have had like a toolbox or something.
But according to the mechanic, once Ray had unloaded whatever was in the trunk, he had apparently had second thoughts about leaving the Lincoln at the body shop.
He informed me that Ray Jadle asked him if he could take the vehicle.
Mr. Jadle wanted to take the car back to his girlfriend's house.
And by the time the state trooper had called, the car, Ray, and his girlfriend were long gone.
The record driver drove to her house, dropped the car off, and drove away.
No one at the body shop had caught the girlfriend's name, but since the tow truck had delivered the Lincoln, the driver did have her address.
He provided me with that address, and I notified my supervisor of that address.
And when they entered the address into the police computers, the investigators were surprised to discover that the name that came up was one they'd already heard in connection with Brad Smithwick's brutal abduction. The missing man's ex-wife, Janet Harrell. Coming up, the investigators close in on Ray and Janet.
He said, "You know that there's a bee on the lookout for you right now."
But will they find the missing man in time?
You always hope that they were just holding him in a room somewhere.
By the afternoon of October 4th, 2007, police investigating the bizarre abduction of Brad Smithwick were pretty sure that his ex-wife, 33-year-old Janet Harrell, was somehow behind the kidnapping.
Brad and Janet had a very bitter divorce.
But the real breakthrough came after Janet's current boyfriend, Ray Jadle, had been rear-ended on a bridge that same morning.
His trunk, at that point, would not stay down, so he stayed around the trunk, held it down with his hand, which, hindsight, it really seemed really strange.
Had Brad or his body been in the trunk? Was that why Ray Jadle had been so anxious to keep it closed? Determined to find out, state troopers drove out to Janet's house, where Ray's Lincoln had been towed after the accident.
Officers do go to Janet Harrell's residence. They end up speaking with her.
Not that she had much to tell them. All Janet said she knew was that Ray had been in an accident earlier that morning, and she had loaned him her car, the same car they'd transferred the contents of the Lincoln's trunk into earlier at the body shop.
Backed the car up to the back bumper of the Lincoln. It was touching bumpers. And then they transferred something out of the Lincoln into the other car.
And the Lincoln? It was still parked at Janet's house.
At that point, the spare tire was on top of the trunk lid to keep the trunk lid down.
Although by the time investigators finally got a look inside the trunk, it wasn't just empty. It had been stripped bare.
The trunk liner was in fact missing.
Although whoever had cleaned out the Lincoln's trunk hadn't done a thorough job.
There was a small amount of blood visible around the seal, the rubber seal to the trunk lid.
All but convinced Janet and her boyfriend were behind Brad's abduction. The authorities didn't arrest her just yet. Instead, they focused on finding Ray Jadle and the missing man. Although by then, it wasn't looking too likely that he was still alive. In addition to Ray's wrecked Lincoln, by that afternoon, the police had also located Brad's missing pickup, not far from the scene of the kidnapping.
The vehicle was parked like 4 blocks from the residence.
Inside the truck, the police found yet more blood.
And also 2 more wires left in the street that was consistent with taser wire.
But where was the man that the investigators believed had wielded that taser? As the afternoon turned to dusk, the entire Outer Banks region was in the midst of a massive manhunt.
It covered 2 counties. We were searching all the way from Ahoskie back up to Edenton.
However, even as law enforcement scoured 2 counties in search of one of their own, a fellow officer informed Ray Jadel that he was a wanted fugitive.
I received a telephone call from a random detective that I know. He's a friend of mine. And he said, "Do you know that there's a bee on the lookout for you right now?"
Tipped off that the police were looking for him, Ray didn't run.
"I'm going to straighten this out."
And at about 5 o'clock that afternoon, he walked through the front door of the Kitty Hawk Police Department.
And when he walked in, he was holding his arms up. He wanted them to know that he was unarmed. He lifts up his shirt like, "I don't have anything on me."
No weapons, at least. But when his fellow Kitty Hawk officers cuffed Ray, they couldn't help noticing that he did have something on him.
He had a blood stain in front of his shorts.
Hustled into the interrogation room, Ray denied having anything to do with Brad's abduction.
They told me that I was under arrest for first-degree kidnapping. And I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking to myself, this is so unreal.
That's what Ray said, but it wasn't what Brad's wife, Cindy, said. She positively identified Ray as the kidnapper.
She said that there's no doubt in her mind that was the guy she saw in the yard that morning.
The next day, Friday, October 5th, the investigators returned to Janet's house and placed her under arrest, too.
She was charged with the accessory after the fact with the first-degree kidnapping.
But had Brad been in the trunk, neither Janet nor Ray Jadel would say.
Nobody's talking, so it's still an ongoing investigation.
With Janet and Ray in custody, the investigators had a single focus: find Brad.
North Carolina Highway Patrol also had their helicopter fly in. There was a lot of people, too, that volunteered their time with four-wheelers and ATVs.
We walked that highway, we walked the fields, trying to locate Mr. Smithwick.
And as several days went by without any sign of Brad's body, his family clung to the chance that he was still alive.
You always keep hoping they were just holding him in a room somewhere.
But 5 days after Brad's kidnapping, a North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission officer was searching the woods near the Edenton Airport when something about the underbrush caught his eye.
A visible path where all the vegetation was laid down, and it was laid down going away from the path that he was on, in a manner that would be consistent with dragging a large, heavy object.
And when the officer followed the drag marks, he soon discovered just what that object was: Brad Smithwick's dead body.
He had been there for 5 days, and the body had already started decomposing. The way they identified Brad was by a couple of tattoos on his back. His body was face down. He was handcuffed.
He had been killed with a single shot to the back of the head. But when?
Was he alive in the trunk? And bound and gagged and just couldn't say anything.
The mere thought was almost too much to bear for those who had been on the Chowan River Bridge that fateful morning.
Was he still alive? Could we have helped?
Quite honestly, I'm beating myself up. You know, what would have happened if I had discovered Brad Smithwick at this point? How that would have changed where we were.
According to the autopsy, it wouldn't have made a difference.
My understanding of the medical examiner's rulings is that his injuries that were suffered from the vehicle collision were post-mortem.
And now that there was no doubt that Brad was dead, the authorities built a murder case against Janet and her boyfriend, starting with the bloodstains in Ray's trunk and on his shorts.
Oh, they had to be sent to the lab to get tested, so they were not charged immediately at that time with his death.
They were still charged with his kidnapping, though, and remained in jail.
The bond was so high.
Brad's family anxiously awaited the results, even as they struggled to adjust to the new reality.
We tried to keep everything as normal as possible for the children, because at the time they were 9 and 10.
Finally, at the end of October, the test results came back. The blood in Ray Jadel's trunk was Brad's. And within days of those findings, Janet and her boyfriend were charged with murder. Coming up, will the prosecutors have enough to convict Janet?
She could walk, which really scared us.
Or will they need to make a deal?
He said the district attorney wants her. They don't want you.
By November of 2008, it had been over a year since Brad Smithwick had been abducted from his front yard and brutally murdered. But that didn't mean the small town of Ahoskie, North Carolina, had forgotten about the crime. Not by any means.
We don't have that many kidnapping cases that turn into a murder case, so, yeah, I mean, it was the talk of the town.
And while a kidnapping and murder was sensational enough, it wasn't the only thing that had people talking. For starters, the alleged mastermind behind the crime was 34-year-old Janet Harrell, Brad's ex-wife and a well-known member of a Christian quartet that sang at area churches.
I think most people were really shocked to hear that Janet was involved in this.
The alleged triggerman in the murder was Janet's boyfriend, a local police officer named Ray Jadel.
It's very unusual, especially having, a law enforcement officer involved in something like this.
But the most sensational thing about the case was how they had been caught.
The biggest break in the case was when Raymond Jadel was in that collision on the bridge.
A collision that had apparently occurred as Ray fled the crime scene with Brad's body in the trunk.
A collision scene that stems from a homicide is just something you'll never forget.
Thanks in part to that collision, the case against Ray was strong.
The evidence was overwhelming. The blood on the shorts, blood in both vehicles, came back to Bradley Smithwick.
However, while Janet was the one with a motive,
she lost custody of the children.
And the authorities were convinced that she was the murder's mastermind.
It would be Miss Harrell who had planned it and then bring Mr. Jadel on board to help her carry this act.
The only evidence tying her to the crime was after the fact.
She assisted him in getting the evidence away.
And since they had no evidence she had helped plan Brad's murder, she faced second-degree murder charges. To try her for first-degree murder, they would need Ray to turn against her and confirm that she had put him up to the killing. But so far, he had refused to cooperate.
He never had a statement. The only time he spoke was at his first appearance. And he said that you have the wrong man.
Could the prosecutors convince Ray to come forward? On November 27, 2008, they upped the charges against him to capital murder.
Which in the state of North Carolina would carry the death penalty.
Would a possible death sentence be enough to turn Ray against Janet? It wasn't long afterward that his attorney approached him about the possibility of cutting a deal.
He said the district attorney wants her. They don't want you. They want her. All you've got to do is say this and this and this. Say she pulled the trigger. That's all you've got to do.
And Ray's response?
I told him to go screw himself.
Ray's attorney and the prosecutors were shocked. Why would Ray, facing a likely death sentence, refuse to name Janet as the mastermind behind her ex-husband's death? Ray claims it was because it wasn't true. In fact, he maintains that the entire thing was a horrific accident. According to Ray, it had all started during the custody battle, when Brad had started harassing Janet.
He would sneak around the house at night. He would do things like bang on the door, throw a rock at the side of the house, or call a cell phone on an unlisted number. Just silly stuff like that, just to try to intimidate her.
And even after Brad had won custody of the kids, Ray claims the harassment had continued.
He broke into the house at one time and completely trashed her bedroom.
Ray claims that Janet had been reluctant to go to the authorities due to the fact that she feared her ex-husband.
This guy is a ex-Marine sniper.
So according to Ray, he had decided to step in. The former cop claims that unbeknownst to Janet, he had gone over to Brad's on the morning of October 4th, 2007.
My intent on going there that morning was simply to have a talk with him.
To confront Brad in a very civil manner, and it basically worked this out to a point where they could just be at peace with each other and move on.
But once they started talking, Ray claims that tempers quickly flared on Brad's part.
He sucker punched me.
A struggle ensued, according to Ray, with the ex-Marine quickly gaining the upper hand.
Brad was bigger and stronger than Ray. I think Brad would have really worked Ray over in a fight.
Or he would have, if not for one thing.
I had my taser with me.
Although according to Ray, he had initially used it in an attempt to defuse the situation.
I pulled out my taser and I flipped the light onto him. And I even warned him, I said, I'm going to shoot you if you don't stop.
But Ray claims that Brad ignored his warning.
His response was just profanity, and he came in to kick me again, and that's when I tased him.
Ray says that when the jolt from the taser dropped Brad to the ground, he had tried to help the stunned man back onto his feet. And when Cindy came out on the porch a few moments later, Ray claims he wasn't trying to tie up her husband. He was trying to untangle him from the wires.
I tried to help him with the taser leads. I said, just take these leads out. I said, you'll be fine.
Ray says that he was about to call out to Cindy and tell her everything was okay when Brad begged him not to. According to Ray, Cindy had no idea Brad had been stalking and harassing his ex-wife, and he aimed to keep it a secret, too.
I didn't want her even knowing what was going on. He said, we gotta get out of here.
According to Ray, that was why he had jumped into the truck with Brad and driven away.
We drove around the block to where my car was parked on the next block over. I got out of the truck because I was gonna leave.
But Ray claims that as he got out of the truck, a handgun, one he says belonged to Brad, had fallen out of the cab and onto the pavement.
I picked it up, and he immediately demanded it back. He said, give me back my gun.
Ray says that considering everything that had just happened, he had refused Brad's request.
I was not going to hand him a gun at that point.
So according to Ray, Brad had tried to take it.
He just lunged in at me and grabbed a hold of the gun.
And as they wrestled over the gun
had an accidental discharge, and it was over.
Brad was killed instantly.
I was just so shocked. I was heartbroken.
Ray says that he was also panicked. Rather than call the police, he'd stuffed Brad's body into the trunk of his Lincoln and driven away.
I figured I'd go to my chief. I'd let him know what happened.
But then, as he drove to Kitty Hawk, Ray's plan changed.
I was flipping out. I took the first dirt road, and I figured I'd just take him out of the car. I'd place him somewhere.
And despite the fact that Brad's autopsy found injuries from the crash, Ray claims that it was only after he had dumped Brad's body that he had gotten in the accident on the Chowan River Bridge.
A woman was speeding behind me. I guess she just didn't even see me and just plowed into the back of my car.
And Janet, Ray claims she was entirely innocent.
We never discussed going over there or ever doing Brad any harm. That's ridiculous. She would never even consider doing anything like that.
Nor, according to Ray, did she see the bloody tarp and the other items he removed from the Lincoln's trunk.
If she saw it, she would have flipped. She would have lost it.
He wouldn't testify against Janet because, according to Ray, the only thing she was guilty of was being his girlfriend.
She had no idea what had went on. She basically got in trouble because she helped me when I called for a ride.
Coming up, can the prosecutors convict Janet without Ray's cooperation?
We were led to believe that this crime was orchestrated by Miss Harrell.
Or will their case come to a surprising end?
Honestly, I couldn't believe it.
By November 2010, it had been 3 long years since Brad Smithwick had been abducted from his Ahoskie, North Carolina home and murdered. His ex-wife, 36-year-old Janet Harrell, and her boyfriend, 41-year-old Ray Jadel, had both been charged with the crime.
We were led to believe that this crime was orchestrated by Miss Harrell, and she convinced Mr. Jadel to be a willing partner in carrying out this crime.
Although threatened with a possible death sentence, Ray had refused to turn on Janet. Yet that November, as her trial date approached, Janet's attorneys contacted the prosecutors about a possible plea deal.
Janet's attorney said that she would be willing to plead to second-degree murder if we wouldn't go to trial.
Ray says he was shocked by Janet's decision.
I couldn't believe it. I honestly, I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking to myself, this girl had absolutely no knowledge of what happened.
There was no words to describe the disbelief.
And although Ray still maintains Brad's death was an accident, he immediately accepted a similar deal.
My attorney said, if you don't take this plea today, that you are going to get the death penalty. There's no other way around it.
So on November 23rd, Janet Harrell and Ray Jadel each stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to Brad's murder.
She pled to second-degree murder. She got basically 14 to 16 years in prison. Mr. Jadel accepted a plea of first-degree murder, life in prison without parole.
Although despite the differences in the pleas and prison terms, when Brad's mother spoke at Ray's sentencing, she made it clear who she held most responsible for her son's death.
I stood up and I told him, I said, Ray, you're a victim. I said, because you were manipulated and tricked into doing this. I said, I do not believe you would have done anything to Brad on your own.
At Janet's sentencing, her 13-year-old daughter did the same, directly confronting her mother about the murder.
She looked at her and she said, how could you take the only person from me that loved me? And of course, Janet didn't say anything. She just kind of looked down at the table.
Although their mother is in prison for their father's murder, Brad and Janet's children have held up well.
They seem to be happy, and I just hate it that their daddy can't be here, and I know they miss him terribly.
But at the same time, most people around Ahoskie and Edenton are having a hard time reconciling what they now know about Janet with their memories of the young woman who sang in church.
Most people couldn't understand why this young lady who sang so beautifully and brought a lot of joy to a lot of people could, allow her life to change like that.
Amazing. I love this.
Pamela Phillips was living the high life in Aspen, Colorado.
She went to fancy restaurants, became a socialite.
Her ex-husband Gary Triano, on the other hand, was a Tucson real estate tycoon struggling to recover from a string of bad deals.
He was in kind of a downswing.
And on November 1st, 1996, Gary's losing streak went from bad to worse.
A bomb exploded in Gary Triano's car.
We have an assassination.
Had a risky business deal cost him his life?
It was payback.
Folks out of Chicago.
The Russian mafia.
Or would the money trail and a 20-year investigation end up leading the police in an entirely different direction?
You're going to be in prison for murder.
1st, 1996. Although it was only 5:30 in the afternoon, the exclusive La Paloma Country Club was already crowded.
A lot of golfers around. It was a Friday afternoon. It was very busy.
Golf wasn't the only game being played, though. On the links and in the lounge, multi-million-dollar deals were being made.
It was quite expensive to be a member of that country club.
And the stakes were about to get even higher. Out in the parking lot, among the ranks of BMWs, Cadillacs, and Mercedes, a car had just exploded.
Parts of things were flying far out into the street.
The windshield ended up 150 yards away into a pool.
Club staff and members rushed out to see what had happened, and what they found looked like a war zone.
The car was devastated.
The roof of the car had blown off. The doors of the car were blown open.
The driver of the Lincoln Town Car was one of the club's most well-known members, 52-year-old Gary Triano.
He was a mover and shaker. Real estate was his game.
But it appeared to be all over.
Folks that he'd been golfing with saw him get into the car.
When emergency personnel arrived to put out the flames engulfing the car, they confirmed it. Gary had been in the vehicle when it exploded.
There was extensive injury to Mr. Triano.
Part of his hand was no longer there, and he had severe injury to his right thigh and a lot of injury to his face, his head.
It was obvious that Gary was expired, and there wasn't anything they could do.
Gary was dead, and since he was the victim of what appeared to be a car bomb, the implications were obvious.
It would appear from preliminary observation that we have an assassination.
And the search for his assassin would lead the investigators deep into both his multi-million-dollar business deals and his 7-year marriage to a former model-turned-successful real estate agent in her own right, 39-year-old Pamela Phillips. Born in 1957, Pamela Phillips grew up in Tucson, dreaming of a better life.
People that grew up with her always said that Pam's aspiration in life was to be rich.
And while she might not have grown up rich, she had grown up blonde and beautiful.
She had been a model at one point in time here in Tucson.
But modeling, especially in a market like Tucson, didn't pay the bills. So in her mid-20s, the sometime model turned to a more profitable profession, selling real estate.
It's kind of an easy living sort of place. A lot of people like it.
A whole lot of people. By the time Pamela got into real estate, Arizona was one of the fastest growing states in the nation, and Tucson was booming.
The whole population of Metro Tucson is close to 1 million people.
And thanks to Pamela's sunny beauty and sharp business sense, she sold houses to quite a few of them.
She was very well known in the real estate business.
She had a good job, she had her own money.
Although for all of her success, Pamela couldn't compare to the real players in the high-dollar world of Tucson real estate. People like Gary Triano. 14 years older than Pam, by the mid-'80s, Gary had moved beyond selling real estate to developing it. One of dozens of up-and-coming tycoons busy carving subdivisions out of the desert.
And he was well known by a lot of people, kind of a wheeler-dealer kind of guy.
And he had the personality to match.
He's the guy that walked in a room and everybody turned and looked.
If you were with him, you knew you were going to have a good time.
And if someone invested in one of his development deals, they were going to make a lot of money too.
Gary was a very, very aggressive businessman. He was always going to come out ahead.
He made a lot of money.
He was no miser, though. With so much money rolling in, Gary made sure to spread it around.
He was very prominent, a huge supporter of many philanthropic organizations in town.
He's the guy that would tip a server $100.
Gary and his wife were equally famous for the lavish parties they threw at their Tucson home. Huge affairs attended by the movers and shakers in Tucson real estate. It's no surprise that one of those parties was where Pamela first met Gary.
Pamela just liked what she saw.
Not just his money and success, either.
He was muscular, he had height, he had stature.
Gary apparently liked what he saw, too. Within months of their meeting, he'd left his wife and started dating Pamela.
Pamela came in and basically took him away from his first wife.
Once his divorce was final, Gary and Pamela married in 1986.
I know Gary loved her.
A year later, the couple welcomed their first child, followed by a second in 1990. And by then, Pamela had given up selling real estate and focused on being everything a wealthy developer's wife was supposed to be.
She was very involved with Junior League. She did all the right things, knew the right people in the community.
Even if her definition of the right people rubbed some the wrong way.
She just thought she was better than everybody else. If you didn't have a lot of money, you were beneath her.
And in light of that, some called what happened to Pamela in the 1990s a comeuppance. After years of success, a series of high-dollar deals collapsed, and Gary's high-flying business empire was in free fall.
He was in kind of a downswing at the time.
Suddenly, the jet-setting couple was grounded, and for Pamela, the landing was especially hard.
I can't even imagine being that kind of person. You know, to be living the high life and all of a sudden now you've fallen down that ladder.
The financial setback took a toll on the couple's relationship, too.
The difficulties that they had in their marriage was related to money.
Specifically, Gary's lack of it.
When Gary started having money troubles, that was when she bailed.
In 1993, Pam filed for divorce and for full custody of the couple's 2 children.
His heart was broken. He loved her and he loved his children.
Coupled with his staggering business losses, the divorce was almost too much for Gary to take.
He checked into a facility because he needed some help. He just couldn't get his life in check and he needed to get himself together. And he did. And he came out okay.
But he also came out alone. At the custody hearing, Pamela argued that her children deserved a secure future, free from the ups and downs of Gary's real estate career. And the judge admitted that she had a point.
She had the full custody. He was allowed visitation, weekends and holidays.
The custody finalized, Pamela took the kids and left Tucson, looking to start a new life in a new city.
After the divorce, she moved to Aspen.
And the fact that her new home was practically synonymous with wealth and celebrity wasn't exactly a surprise to Gary's friends back in Tucson.
It wasn't any secret that she loved the power, she loved the money.
A divorce settlement would only go so far, though. So once in Aspen, Pam took up her old career.
She became involved in real estate activity again.
But she spent even more time enjoying the jet-setting lifestyle of the Tony resort town.
She became a socialite.
She went to fancy restaurants and the fancy social club there in Aspen where the more wealthy people hung out.
Although it wasn't all for fun, Pamela's real goal for working the Aspen social circuit was closing a high-dollar deal of her own, one that had nothing to do with real estate.
Pam wanted to develop a lifestyle that was financed by a husband.
But would she have time to find her sugar daddy? Because after less than 2 years in Aspen, she was still searching and sizing up the market when a bomb blast threatened to drag her back to Tucson. Coming up, Pamela suggests a shocking source for the bomb.
He had these connections to the mob.
But a chance discovery reveals an entirely different connection.
Found in the van were a lot of notes.
At 5:38 p.m. on November 1st, 1996, a massive explosion rocked the exclusive La Paloma Country Club in Tucson, Arizona.
A lot of 911 calls at that point. No one knew at first what exactly had happened.
But by the time the police arrived on the scene, the cause of the explosion appeared all too clear. A car bomb.
There were parts of the car that were found out on the main roadway outside the country club.
And the driver of the car, a prominent real estate developer named Gary Triano, had been killed instantly.
When the bomb exploded, he had already gotten into his car.
Incredibly, despite the debris scattered across the parking lot, no one else was seriously injured.
The only other significant injury was another man who was parked in the parking lot, actually in a car just adjacent to Mr. Triano's car. He suffered some cuts from broken glass.
While the coroner's personnel removed Gary's body from the remains of his Lincoln, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the Tucson Police Bomb Squad, and agents from the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms moved in to try and determine the nature of the bomb that killed Gary.
There were numerous bomb squads.
It was a sea of law enforcement. Red lights, blue lights, flashing.
And considering the power of the explosion, the search for clues covered a wide area.
There are car parts and other evidence blown across Sunrise, blown on top of buildings.
Roofs were searched, golf courses were searched. It was an exhaustive effort.
While the explosive experts worked, Gary's family and friends reeled from not just the news that he was dead, but also the almost unbelievable way he died.
It's one thing when you die of a heart attack or you die in a car wreck or something, but to be blown to bits, people were devastated.
It was hard to believe a car bomb intentionally set to kill someone.
But that appeared to be the case, more or less. After hours of careful searching, the ATF and bomb squads had recovered enough components to begin reconstructing the device.
It was a pipe bomb.
The investigators had also recovered the shredded remains of the athletic bag the killer had apparently used to conceal the bomb.
He disguised the device to look innocent.
And while Gary was playing golf at the club, it appeared that the killer had somehow placed the device inside the Lincoln.
Walk up to the car and open the door, drop the bag in there, walk back to your car and wait.
And based on the reconstructed remains of the device, the killer had waited.
But this was a remote detonated device.
Which would indicate the person that pushed the button could see the car.
But whose finger had been on the button? Hoping for more information, the investigators spent the next several days contacting Gary's friends and business associates. But what they found out didn't exactly narrow things down.
Gary Triano was a man who angered a lot of people.
According to the people who knew Gary well, the real estate developer had been in a bit of a slump.
They did owe a lot of money.
He was in debt, millions of dollars.
40 million to be exact. And he had a habit of not paying up.
We learned about numerous lawsuits that were pending.
Numerous was not an understatement either.
He had 100 civil lawsuits against him.
Whether those lawsuits would ever recover the money Gary owed was tough to say. 2 years earlier, in 1994, the developer had filed for bankruptcy.
So, from the investigative point of view, there were a lot of people who might have had a motive to kill Gary Triano.
When the investigators spoke to Gary's ex-wife, Pamela Phillips, she suggested that some of the people he owed money to were just the sort to put a hit on Gary. It was soon after the bombing that the investigators contacted Pamela at her home in Aspen, Colorado.
They were trying to gather information from her about what was going on in Gary Triano's life at the time that he was murdered.
According to Pamela, there had been plenty going on, and little of it above board. The 39-year-old told them that Gary had grown increasingly desperate as his debts mounted.
There were Chinese investors, Mexican investors, folks out of Chicago.
There was the innuendo that he had these connections to the mob.
Was it possible one of those connections was behind the bomb that caused Gary's car to explode? That's definitely what Pamela suggested.
It was payback because Gary owed so much money.
And when the investigators followed up back in Tucson, Gary's friends appeared to confirm Pam's sinister theory.
There was some speculation that there was maybe some mob involvement.
Not only that, according to his friends, Gary had grown increasingly paranoid in the weeks leading up to his death.
Gary Triano was telling people, I think I'm being followed.
By mid-November 1996, it had been 2 weeks since Pamela Phillips' ex-husband had been murdered outside a Tucson, Arizona country club. But the whole city was still talking about the spectacular crime.
A pipe bomb exploded in Gary Triano's car, ripping the roof off the car and killing him.
And since Gary was a wealthy real estate developer with a recent run of bad luck, Tucson was buzzing with speculation about a mob hit.
The rumors were amazing. I mean, everything from the Russian mafia to people he owed a lot of money to, and he did owe a lot of money.
Whether it was mobsters or disgruntled business partners, the long list of potential suspects wasn't making things easy for the authorities.
There were business associates anywhere from Florida, Chicago, China, Mexico.
But then the Tucson investigators received an unexpected tip from a police detective in Aspen, Colorado. He told the investigators he had been working a case involving a con artist by the name of Ron Young.
He had an arrest warrant out for Ron Young in connection with a fraud in the Aspen area.
So far, Young had escaped arrest, fleeing Aspen in a stolen van. But in October of 1996, almost a month before the explosion that killed Gary Triano, California police had recovered the van. And inside, they had found shocking evidence that tied Ron Young to the dead man.
There's notes about intimate details of Gary's life. There's a map of Tucson, notes about people that Gary associated with.
They also found evidence that Ron had been in Tucson in the weeks before the bombing.
A receipt for a hotel, which is halfway between where Gary was living and La Paloma Country Club.
Add it all up, and the evidence was unmistakable.
Ron Young had spent some time stalking Gary Triano.
After almost 2 weeks of wild rumors, the investigators had just found their first real lead.
We believe he's implicated in this murder case.
And since Ron had been based in Aspen, the fact that he was implicated raised some complicated questions about Gary's ex-wife, Pamela Phillips.
She lived in Aspen at the time that the bombing occurred.
And that wasn't just a coincidence either. According to the Aspen detective, Pam and Ron knew one another. When Pam first moved to Colorado after the divorce, she and Ron had been neighbors.
They began some sort of a friendship, and it seems to have started where Mr. Young was giving Pam Phillips financial advice.
But as time went on, discussions between the con man and the divorcee had turned from financial advice to something far more intimate.
There was a romantic relationship between Pamela Phillips and Ron Young.
We have witnesses that talk about Ron spending the night, long evenings in front of the fireplace, curled up with each other.
The relationship had lasted until Ron skipped town with a van full of papers pertaining to Gary. But did that mean Pamela was in on the murder? Working with their counterparts in Aspen, the Tucson investigators shifted their focus to Gary's ex-wife. In the 2 years since moving to Aspen, Pamela had been enjoying everything the upscale resort town had to offer.
People described her as being somewhat of a socialite.
And as far as her Aspen friends knew, she could afford it.
She was working as a realtor.
But when the investigators took a closer look at Pamela's finances, they discovered that the 39-year-old wasn't doing nearly as well as she'd led her new friends to believe.
She was living off of about $250,000 that she was able to walk away from Tucson with, from selling their home in Tucson.
Although in a Tony resort town like Aspen, $250,000 wouldn't go far.
Aspen is an extremely expensive place to live.
And after almost 2 years there, Pamela's money was running out.
She was down to her last $60,000.
She blew through the money.
But did that mean she was behind the plot that blew up Gary? Her connection to Ron Young certainly suggested it. And so did her need for cash, once the investigators discovered that Gary had been insured for a total of $2 million. The policy didn't name Pamela as the direct beneficiary.
The policy was taken out for the benefit of the children.
But with the oldest only 9, Gary had to appoint a trustee to control the money until the children turned 18.
Pam Phillips was the trustee.
However, despite her strong motive and her suspicious connection to Ron Young, the investigators couldn't make an arrest.
I certainly had no evidence that directly linked her.
To prove that Pamela was behind the bombing, the Pima County authorities needed the man they believed had planted it.
The big missing piece was this person, Ron Young.
He had fallen off the face of the earth. No one could find him.
After ditching the van that clued the police in on his potential connection to Gary's murder, Ron's trail had gone completely cold. And by November of 1997, a year after Gary's death, the investigation into his murder was just as cold.
The case was open and active, but there wasn't a lot of activity going on.
Not on the part of the police, at least. Pamela, on the other hand, was suddenly very busy and very rich.
Within 3 months of the murder, the insurance company paid out a little over $2 million to Pam Phillips.
And with the money to finance her socialite lifestyle in Aspen, Pamela had finally found herself a new sugar daddy.
She was dating a very wealthy gentleman. They were like one step away from engagement.
But would she fulfill her longtime goal of marrying money? In November of 2005, 9 years after the bomb that killed Gary, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, ATF, and Aspen Police arranged for Ron Young to be featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted.
An episode mostly talking about the fraud investigation, but also bringing up various aspects of the Triano murder,
including enough about Pamela's suspected involvement to give her future fiancé some serious second thoughts.
Upon the airing of the America's Most Wanted show, he separated all ties to her.
More importantly for the Tucson authorities, the day after the episode aired, they received an urgent phone call from a Fort Lauderdale, Florida chiropractor.
Ron Young is going to be in my office.
Ron Young is living in Fort Lauderdale under an assumed name.
And when Ron arrived for his chiropractic appointment the next day, he was arrested for the almost 10-year-old fraud warrant.
He didn't resist or anything like that.
He didn't admit any guilt either.
He denies any involvement with Gary Triano's death.
But when the authorities searched his apartment, they found what appeared to be a wealth of evidence.
They found floppy disks, zip disks, the hard drive to his computer.
There's a bunch of microcassettes.
And when officers popped one of those tapes into a player,
they heard the voice of Pamela Phillips.
Hi, I need to talk to you.
He kept meticulous records of phone conversations, audio recordings, and emails between the two of them back and forth.
They discussed the money that was owed by Miss Phillips to Ron Young.
A $400,000 obligation on the part of Pam Phillips.
And the former real estate agent had been paying it off like a mortgage, slowly, over time.
Miss Phillips had been surreptitiously sending money to Ron Young every month in small amounts, $1,500, $2,000 every couple of weeks.
I mailed what I had.
But what was the money for? As far as the cops were concerned, it was no mystery.
For the purpose of Ron Young killing Gary Triano.
However, throughout the hours of conversations, Ron and Pamela had been careful. In fact, the only time either of them came close to saying what the money was for came near the end of the tapes, when she started trying to weasel out of paying up.
I'm not able to send you any more money. I can't. I just can't.
And when Ron called her back, he had slipped up in anger, finally revealing just what would happen if Pamela didn't pay.
You're going to be in prison for murder.
After almost 10 years, the police believed they had the proof they needed.
The tapes were damning. This was money for the hit.
The prosecutors spent the next 2.5 years making sure their case was as airtight as possible.
This is a massive case. There's only, I believe, over 400,000 pages of just paper.
And in 2008, the prosecutors finally presented their massive case to the grand jury.
Pamela Phillips was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder.
But had they waited too long? When the investigators showed up at Pamela's Aspen home with an arrest warrant, she wasn't there.
But she's left the country.
She'd gone to Switzerland, only this time she wasn't shopping for a wealthy boyfriend.
Switzerland will not allow extradition if it's a death penalty case.
Pamela couldn't avoid arrest entirely, but her shrewd move did force the prosecutor's hand.
In order to effectuate the extradition, we had to agree that we would not seek the death penalty against Pam Phillips.
It wasn't until December 3rd, 2009, more than a decade after Gary's death, that Pam was finally arrested for his murder.
She was arrested by Interpol, and she was held there for a period of time before she was extradited back to the United States.
And when she arrived at the Tucson airport on July 2nd, 2010, handcuffed and under police escort, it was hard to even recognize the former Aspen socialite.
She looked disheveled. She had no makeup.
She didn't appear too happy to be back in Arizona either.
How's it feel to be back in Tucson?
And it was about to get even warmer.
When I saw her on TV, it was just a really joyful day for me, because I knew that they finally had her and that justice would be served.
Coming up, at trial, the defense claims there was no murder plot.
He was extorting money from her.
But will a surprise witness say otherwise?
She said, oh my gosh, she actually did it.
On February 19th, 2014, Aspen socialite Pamela Phillips finally stood trial for her ex-husband's murder. It had been 5 years since her arrest in Europe, 6 years since she'd fled the country, and almost 18 years since Gary Triano had been killed outside a Tucson country club. But the crime was far from forgotten.
The very public and dramatic way in which Gary Triano was killed, using a pipe bomb in his car, made the case something that grabbed the public's attention.
The man who planted that bomb was already in prison. Ron Young had been convicted of murder in March of 2010.
The prosecution's perspective was that he was the hitman, that he was getting payment for killing Gary Triano.
According to the prosecution's opening statement, Pamela had plotted her ex-husband's death in order to get her hands on $2 million worth of life insurance.
Pamela Phillips was the only one that benefited from the death of Gary Triano.
That life insurance policy was just dangling in front of her, and she went for it.
And since her boyfriend Ron Young was already wanted for fraud and desperate for the cash to start a new life, the prosecutors claimed it hadn't been hard for Pamela to convince him to carry out the murder.
There was an agreement between Ron and Pam. Hey, if Gary dies, I get $2 million. I'll give you $400,000. That can start a new life for you.
So according to the prosecutors, Ron had spent weeks stalking his victim, and then on November 1st, 1996, detonated a remote-controlled bomb that he had planted in Gary's car.
From all appearances, Mr. Triano had gotten into the driver's seat, had reached over, and as he reached over, the bomb went off.
And the prosecutors claimed that it was no coincidence that soon after that bomb went off, Pamela had started paying Ron off.
She was sending him $1,500 on 1 week and then $1,800 a week following that.
Being able to show that financial connection was very critical.
It was also easy, thanks to the meticulous records Ron had kept.
The phone calls, the emails were much of what we relied on at trial to show that there had been this financial relationship between the two of them.
However, while the hours of phone calls and hundreds of emails Ron saved did show a clear financial relationship, they didn't quite add up to a murder confession.
There were no direct admissions on these phone conversations.
You know, they never came out and said it.
All told, the word murder came up only once, when Ron lost his temper in an argument and appeared to threaten Pamela, suggesting what would happen to her if she failed to pay.
You're going to be in prison for murder.
That was the only time murder came up in the tapes. But was it the only time Pamela had discussed killing Gary? On February 27th, the prosecutors called a woman named Laura to the stand. A wealthy Tucson resident, Laura had known Pamela Phillips for more than 20 years.
She testified that she was good friends with Pamela.
And she testified that she had been one of Pamela's closest confidants during her divorce from Gary. A divorce that, according to Laura, had more than its share of nastiness.
There was a lot of fighting in court and out of court.
Including one fight whose aftermath Laura claimed to remember vividly.
Gary had come over to the house, had been pretty rough with Pamela.
When he left, according to Laura, Pamela had called her in tears, so she and another friend had rushed straight to Pamela's.
They came over and were trying to calm her down.
But as it turned out, Pamela hadn't been frightened. Laura said she had been furious.
Clearly, Phillips had gotten to the point where she hated Triano.
And according to Laura, Pamela said she had decided to do something about it.
She said, I should just have him killed.
Miss Phillips told her that she could easily hire someone to have him taken out, that his golf game was so predictable that he'd easily be found.
Laura told the court that at the time, she dismissed Pamela's plotting, figuring her friend was simply blowing off steam.
She didn't think a lot of the statement.
But then, on November 1st, 1996, she had realized that Pam had been dead serious.
When she heard Gary Triano had been killed, she said to her husband, "Oh my gosh, she actually did it."
So why hadn't Laura come forward then? Why keep the secret almost 20 years?
Her answer is, because after Gary died, we realized if she could kill him, she could kill us.
She feared for her life.
Would the jury find her claims convincing? The defense certainly didn't. On cross, they argued with the case once again in the news. There was another far more obvious and less incriminating reason that she had come forward.
The defense tried to suggest that maybe she was confabulating her real memories with things she had read in the newspapers.
And when the defense started presenting its case, they claimed that even if Pamela had been angry at Gary, and even if she had said those things, that still didn't mean she was involved in his murder. And neither was Ron Young. According to the defense, the whole thing was an elaborate con.
They portrayed Ronald Young as a con man who was ripping off Pamela Phillips.
And the emails, voicemails, and financial records that Ron had so meticulously and inexplicably saved, according to the defense, they were all part of his scheme to extort Pamela.
They're explaining the payments that Pamela Phillips was making to Ron Young as really extortion payments.
But if Pam and Ron hadn't killed Gary, then who had? The defense claimed that the state had overlooked the most obvious answer of all, the one Pamela had first given them almost 20 years ago.
The defense at trial wanted to portray him as having some mob ties.
And when Gary's business had gone south and he couldn't pay back the money he'd borrowed, Gary had paid with his life.
It was a scorned business associate of Gary Triano's that had him killed.
After almost 20 years, would the rumors that circulated after Gary's death be enough to get Pamela off a murder charge? As the case went to the jury, the prosecutors and police couldn't rule out the possibility.
We have no eyewitness. We have no physical evidence.
Coming up, the prosecutors brace themselves as the verdict is read.
Whether or not we had enough, that was our concern.
But Pamela appears confident.
She would just look at the camera and do this smile.
On April 8, 2014, 55-year-old Pamela Phillips sat in a Tucson, Arizona courtroom looking every bit the Aspen socialite.
Pamela Phillips would spend a period of time in a room adjacent to the courtroom, getting ready for court every morning.
But for the last 2 months, the state had been trying to convince the jury that the former real estate agent had planned the sensational 1996 murder of her ex-husband, Gary Triano, killed by a bomb that detonated in his car outside Tucson's most exclusive country club.
Pamela Phillips stood to gain $2 million from an insurance policy.
They portrayed her as selfish and manipulative, and that she was someone who wanted wealth above all else.
According to the prosecution, Pamela had hired her ex-boyfriend, Ron Young, to put the bomb in her ex-husband's car in exchange for a cut of the insurance money.
They continued to live off of the benefits of the murder for the next 14 years.
But despite a clear trail of financial transactions and communication between the two, the prosecutors still didn't have any physical evidence that tied Pamela to the murder.
We were concerned about the circumstantial nature of our case. We felt absolutely we had the right person, but whether or not we had enough circumstantial evidence to convict, that was our concern going into deliberations.
The defense had made the most of that weakness, too, suggesting that one of Gary's many disgruntled business partners was behind the murder.
He did owe a lot of money, and there were people who were suing him.
But who would the jurors believe? When the jury filed in to read the verdict, the only person in the courtroom who appeared confident was Pamela Phillips.
She would just look at the camera and do this smile.
But would her smile still be there once the verdict was read?
You find the defendant, Pamela Ann Phillips, guilty of first-degree murder.
She had this look like, I don't believe this. And in fact, she shook her head like, no.
She couldn't believe that this had happened, that she was convicted.
For Gary's family and friends, their almost 20-year wait for justice was finally over.
You could hear a sigh of relief from the Triano family.
No high-fiving, no cheering, but just like it's over.
And on May 22nd, 2014, Pamela Phillips was sentenced to life in prison. And while the Arizona prison system is a far cry from Aspen, Pamela got what she had always wanted. She's set for life.
She killed somebody for money, and she just destroyed a lot of lives. She'll get to spend the rest of her life in jail.
Watasha and Norman had been high school sweethearts.
Knew each other since they were little.
And the attractive young couple married at 20.
I thought she was the right person for him.
I thought she was a nice young lady.
And Norman appeared to be a dedicated husband and provider.
He joined the National Guard to try and do better for himself.
But then, only days before their second wedding anniversary.
He just disappeared.
And according to Watasha, there was a reason.
She said he owed people drug money.
But if Watasha's husband was on the run, he didn't get far.
The body had been decapitated.
Was it gang related? Was some type of drug related payback?
Or was it payback of a different sort?
This was very odd for a young lady to be buying these sort of things.
Search after search is Visine a poison.
That's why we're here. We know where Norman's at. And I'm lying.
Mechanicsburg, Illinois, October 29, 2012. It was a quiet Monday evening in this farming town just east of the state capital of Springfield.
It's a very small community, approximately 300 people. It's very rural.
Shortly after 5 o'clock in the evening, a man was driving home on a lonely country road outside of town, keeping a close eye on a creek that ran near the road.
He's actually a deer hunter and was looking for deer. Our deer season was starting.
But when the man spotted something at the edge of the woods along the creek, it didn't look like a deer.
He saw something at the bottom of the embankment, but he really just couldn't identify it.
It was visible from the road, but not clearly visible.
The man shrugged it off and drove home. But as he was eating his dinner, he continued to ponder the mysterious object he'd seen.
I still nagged at him as to what that might have been, so he called a neighbor.
So the two men drove back to the spot and approached the strange object lying near the creek.
They thought they saw a dead hog.
But when the men got closer, they realized the dead body wasn't a hog. It was a man. And he had been butchered.
The body had been decapitated. There were no hands or feet on the body.
Horrified, the two men reported their grisly discovery.
They called the Mechanicsburg Police Department.
Not that the tiny local force had much experience with murder.
This is, rural Mechanicsburg. This kind of thing, doesn't happen.
And even the county sheriff's sergeant was shocked by the dismembered, decapitated body.
I had not encountered anything like that in the course of my career.
Maybe it was somebody even who came down from Chicago and dumped the body.
The search for the dead man's identity would soon have investigators asking questions about gangs, drugs, and a young woman who sang in her church choir, Watasha Denton McCaster. Born in 1990, Watasha Denton grew up in South Chicago, the daughter of a hardworking ex-military man.
Same job for 20 plus years in Chicago. Dedicated family man, worked very, very, very hard to support his family.
And Watasha learned early on the importance of always doing her very best.
Whatever she set out to do, she was successful.
By elementary school, she had already grown to be a quiet, serious girl and a good student.
Very nice and sweet, very smart.
She was musically talented, too. She grew up singing in church and playing in the school band.
She had played a number of instruments.
She wasn't a wallflower, though. In 9th grade, the quiet, serious girl started dating one of the most popular kids in school, Norman Raymel McCaster. Although the same age, Watasha and Norman's backgrounds were vastly different. While Watasha's dad was in the service, Norman's was hustling on Chicago's street corners.
I was out in the street, selling drugs, gangbanging.
As an infant, Norman's mother took him to Arkansas, where Norman spent his formative years, surrounded by her family who helped take care of him.
My mother, his grandmother, raised him until she died.
Soon after, the 12-year-old returned home to Chicago.
He moved back up here with his other grandmother.
Once back in Chicago, he was reunited with his father. After Norman's birth, Marcel had managed to walk away from gangs and drugs.
When you have a kid like that, made me stop doing and turn my life all the way around.
Despite his complicated childhood, by the time he finished middle school, there was no denying that Norman turned out well.
He was very outgoing. Norman was very likable.
He's an awesome kid.
One who turned his youthful energy in a positive direction.
He was interested in basketball, football, all sports.
And most of all,
he loved wrestling ever since he was like 2 years old.
However, sports wasn't the only thing that interested Norman.
He's a ladies' man.
When Norman first started dating, he was like 15.
And one of the first girls he dated was Watasha.
Ray and Tasha knew each other since they were little.
The couple first started going out in 9th grade and never really stopped.
They had dated off and on throughout middle school and high school.
But there was nothing exclusive about their relationship. That just wasn't Norman's style.
He had a lot of girlfriends.
He thought he was the hottest thing out there.
Their on-again, off-again romance was off after high school, when Norman's wrestling prowess won him a college scholarship.
He won numerous awards for wrestling. He won state champion 2 years in a row. Yeah, he was a state qualifier.
But his college years would be cut short one night after campus police were called to a fraternity party to break up a fight and ended up arresting Norman for drinking underage.
He had a beer bottle in his hand. He ended up getting arrested for it.
The incident cost Norman his wrestling scholarship.
That scholarship was revoked because of his use of alcohol on campus.
With the scholarship gone, Norman dropped out of college, but he didn't give up.
He joined the Illinois Army National Guard to try and do better for himself, try and pay for school.
When he told me he was going to join the Army, I knew that wasn't for him, but he's like, Mom, I can do it.
Joining the Guard wasn't the only big change in Norman's life either. He'd started dating Watasha again. Like Norman, Watasha had gone off to college.
She was a student at the University of Illinois at Springfield.
Pretty and ambitious, getting a degree wasn't her only goal. Instead, it was just the first step in a much larger plan.
It was her intention to get her bachelor's degree at UIS, join the military, as her father had been in the military, and then go to dental school after that.
And she was determined to succeed.
Failure for her was not an option.
Norman and Watasha started seeing each other again on the weekends and during her breaks from school.
I was excited for him, because I thought she was the right person for him. They were on the right path.
I thought she was a nice young lady, because she always talked intelligent and stuff.
This time, though, Watasha wouldn't be one of many women in Norman's life. She was the only one.
He had saved up all his money to get her a ring.
And nearly a year into their relationship, when his parents and Watasha showed up at boot camp for his graduation, Norman asked her to marry him.
We all went down there for the ceremony, and he proposed to her.
Watasha said yes, and after years of dating off and on, they wasted no time in getting married on October 26, 2010.
At Merritt City Hall in Springfield.
Once married, Watasha and Norman settled into Springfield, where she was still in college.
They weren't from here, they were transplants.
Although they soon started putting down roots. Watasha joined a church.
She was an active member in a local church. She sang in the choir.
And Norman found a way to share his wrestling expertise with local youth.
He was a volunteer wrestling coach for one of our local high schools. He was passionate about it and wanted to help out kids, so he sort of just showed up at the high school and asked if he could help.
In addition to volunteering at the local school and his guard duty, Norman made extra cash working for a temp agency.
This was a guy that showed up for work early, left late, got along with everyone.
And by the fall of 2012, with their second anniversary approaching, it looked as if the couple was well settled into their modest rental home on the north end of town.
They seemed friendly, didn't seem like they had a whole lot of problems. All in all, it seemed like a nice couple.
Things weren't perfect, though, at least not for Norman's family. Now that he was living 3 hours away in Springfield, they rarely saw him.
One time we had contact with Norman when he came up here for once a month for drill.
I think that really bothered his dad.
Just as worrisome, his son had started avoiding him too.
Every time I call, he's busy. He's doing something. He's this, he's that.
And by October, he had grown so distant that Norman's father started to wonder, was his son in some sort of trouble?
I'm afraid he couldn't tell me what was going on.
Coming up, the authorities struggled to identify a headless murder victim.
We were wondering, do we have a maniac loose?
And a single scrap of paper provides a crucial clue.
I think maybe we had some divine intervention on this case.
On the evening of October 29, 2012, police in the tiny town of Mechanicsburg, Illinois, had an unusual mystery on their hands.
I was listening to the police scanner, and all of a sudden I started to hear chatter about a body being found dumped.
For rural Mechanicsburg, a dead body dumped in the woods was shocking enough.
We don't have a lot of murders in Sangamon County.
But this was no ordinary murder.
The victim was decapitated.
He was also missing both of his hands and both of his feet.
Blood on the guardrail suggested that someone had stopped on the road and rolled or dragged the body down the embankment.
When you go over the guardrail, away from the road, there's real tall grass. The only way you would have been able to see the body, much like the witnesses did, is if you were actually looking over right there.
Based on the decomposition, it appeared that the body was several days old. But exactly how the man died wasn't all that clear. Although considering that he'd been cruelly dismembered and then dumped on the side of a remote country road, the investigators figured they had a good idea why he had been killed.
My first thought is that this was maybe drug-related or possibly a gang killing.
And gang-related or not, the local authorities assumed they were after more than one culprit.
A crime of this magnitude, I speculated at the time that there would at least be multiple people involved, simply because of the amount of work that it would take to dismember a body and then transport it.
Just where the body had been transported from was tougher to say, although the investigators at the scene did have a few theories.
They didn't think that the body was somebody from Mechanicsburg.
Instead, if the crime was gang or drug-related, that suggested Chicago, or possibly Springfield, a city of 100,000 a half hour west of the crime scene.
We have drugs like any city or any town in the United States. In many of our cases, stem from drug use or drug abuse.
And if the crime wasn't drug or gang-related, that possibility had local law enforcement even more on edge.
We were wondering, do we have a serial killer? Do we have a maniac loose?
Either way, one thing was certain.
Whoever did this is obviously capable of doing terrible things.
Terrible things that made identifying the dead man a real challenge.
By cutting off the hands and feet, you're going to remove any type of fingerprint data. Also, by removing or decapitating the head, you're going to take away all dental records. You're going to take any facial features.
There were so many unknowns. We didn't know who the victim was. I thought to myself, this case will never be solved.
However, if the case went unsolved, it wouldn't be from lack of effort. Investigators worked through the night, hoping to discover the dead man's missing body parts.
There were cadaver dogs that were sent out and searched that entire area. Nothing was found.
But when they processed the scene, detectives did find one thing.
We found a receipt. There was a Walmart receipt laying on the side of the road.
Was it connected to the butchered corpse at the bottom of the embankment?
It's windy. It could have blown out of any vehicle traveling the area.
Two things suggested that wasn't the case. One was the small amount of blood smudged on the paper. The other was one item listed on the receipt.
The receipt was for the purchase of a reciprocating saw.
I think maybe we had some divine intervention on this case.
The next morning, convinced the receipt was no coincidence, the investigators went to the Springfield Walmart where the purchase had been made and pulled the security tapes.
They had an individual who was making a purchase on video for the items that were on the receipt.
And what the investigators saw surprised them. The person making the purchase didn't exactly fit the profile of a drug dealer or a gangbanger.
What our detectives found was a young lady.
Unexpected or not, the video matched the receipt perfectly. She clearly purchased a reciprocating saw and a respirator mask 6 minutes before midnight on October 25th, 4 days before the dismembered body had been found.
We found this was very odd for a young lady to be buying these sort of things at that hour of the day.
And believe it or not, she bought them with a credit card.
Did we have some luck on our side? We absolutely had some luck.
And since she had used a credit card, the investigators also had the young woman's name.
We identified her as Watasha Denton McCaster.
Although while the authorities now knew who the woman in the video was, they still hadn't identified the victim. On October 31st, the coroner tackled the gruesome task of performing an autopsy on what was left of the man officially known as John Doe. And what he found confirmed what the police suspected, that the man had been dead for several days and that he'd been dismembered with a reciprocating saw.
The type of cuts, especially with the bone, were very jagged, which would be consistent with the sawzall, or reciprocating saw.
Although the saw wasn't the murder weapon.
The damage to the body from dismemberment was post-mortem.
We didn't have actual cause of death.
Toxicology report, all that came back negative.
And other than the dismemberment, there were no visible wounds on the body, at least not on the portion that the authorities had, which led them to one conclusion.
We felt strongly that the homicide occurred probably through some type of head wound.
However, while the autopsy couldn't identify the cause of death, it could help identify the victim eventually.
I knew that we would be able to obtain a DNA profile.
Of course, identifying that DNA profile would take time and something to compare it to. But the investigators weren't about to wait, because while they still hadn't identified the victim, they had identified a suspect, Watasha.
We started to do surveillance on her.
Although the more the investigators tailed her around Springfield, the less she looked like a killer.
I wondered if we were on the wrong track.
She seemed very, very ordinary.
She looked like a 20-year-old college kid with not a care in the world. Going to class, meeting people at the University of Illinois campus in Springfield, going out to eat.
However, the investigators did more than just follow Watasha around campus.
We collected her garbage.
For the most part, what the investigators found was as ordinary as Watasha. Empty cans, junk mail, and numerous empty bottles of Visine.
They discarded it because they really didn't know that it had anything to do with the case.
But then, more than 2 weeks after the headless body had been found, the investigators discovered something interesting among the rubbish.
We found identifications, driver's license, there was a military ID, and they were in the name of Norman Ramel McCaster.
And they had all been cut off with scissors. But did that mean Watasha had also cut up her husband with a reciprocating saw? For the moment, the investigators were still hesitant to haul the 22-year-old in for questioning.
She did not have a criminal record. She was a student at a local college.
Instead, since they now knew that Norman was in the National Guard, they followed up with his unit and made yet another suspicious discovery.
He did not show up on his October 25th drill.
Not only was that roughly around the time their John Doe had been killed, it was very unlike Norman.
His supervisors referred to him as a soldier, never missed drill.
And when they followed up with the temp agency that Norman worked with, they discovered he'd missed his most recent assignment too, on the 29th, the day the dead body had been found out in Mechanicsburg.
His supervisors said he was a very hard worker, never missed work.
Norman's disappearance, the discarded IDs, and the fact that his wife had recently purchased a reciprocating saw, the investigators were convinced they were on the right track.
We knew she was a suspect.
There was only one problem. They still didn't have any proof that Norman McCaster was dead.
They still didn't really know who the body was.
Coming up, Norman's guard service offers a chance at confirming the corpse's identity.
They keep DNA samples of everyone in the military.
But will their first hunch turn out to be correct?
He was running around with people who were on drugs.
By November 21st, it had been more than 3 weeks since a hunter had found a decapitated corpse alongside a country road in Mechanicsburg, Illinois. But the authorities were nearly convinced that the dead man was Watasha Denton McCaster's husband, Norman. Not only had the 22-year-old college student purchased the reciprocating saw that the investigators believed to be connected to the crime, their surveillance revealed that she had spent the past 3 weeks tossing his belongings in the trash.
They found his cut-up driver's license and credit cards and a picture of the two of them, things that you normally wouldn't expect to find in the trash.
However, the investigators still weren't sure that the headless body was Norman's. But the fact that Norman was in the National Guard offered a way to settle the matter once and for all.
They keep DNA samples of everyone in the military for purposes of identifying typically battlefield body parts.
The investigators sent the DNA samples from the autopsy off to the Department of Defense, and while they waited for the results, they continued to keep close tabs on Watasha.
We put a GPS tracker on our car so we knew where the car was at all times.
One of her first trips to the Sangamon County Courthouse on November 7th indicated that whether her husband was dead or not, Watasha was done with him.
She filed paperwork for a divorce.
But was it strictly a formality? Because based on the receipts they continued to pull from Watasha's trash, the investigators were increasingly convinced that Norman was dead.
She had also made purchases for cleaning supplies, gloves, a lot of plastic wrapping, air fresheners.
The investigators also recovered receipts and paperwork indicating that on the same day her husband disappeared, Watasha had gone to Lowe's and ordered a large deep freezer. However, less than an hour later, Watasha had apparently reconsidered the purchase.
She canceled that order. It was never delivered to the house.
Was it because she'd come up with another strategy? After all, within hours of ordering the freezer, she'd gone to Walmart and bought a reciprocating saw. Based on other things they found in Watasha's trash, the investigators believed that she had dismembered her husband, or at least killed him in the house.
We found bathroom tile in the garbage that had blood on it.
There was a pair of latex gloves, and blood was identified on those gloves.
And when the crime lab compared the blood on those gloves to blood from John Doe's torso, it was a match. But was it also Norman's? That depended on the DNA results.
The Army Crime Laboratory verified that our profile from the torso matched their profile in their database.
Now that they had a positive identification, the investigators contacted Norman's family in Chicago.
They don't want to tell us over the phone exactly what is going on. So we head down to Springfield that day.
And when the investigators told them that Norman was dead,
I just want to see my son's body. And the coroner said that's not a good idea.
Then the investigators gave them the devastating news about the condition of Norman's remains.
I just couldn't really believe what was happening. Because this is a young man that had so much going on in his life. He had a future.
That's what his family said. Although according to what they told the investigators, Watasha had recently tried to convince them otherwise. They said that Watasha had called them at the end of October to say that she was worried about Norman.
He was running around with people who were on drugs.
His family didn't believe it for a minute.
That doesn't sound like rape.
Then, according to the family, Watasha had called back a few days later with even more disturbing news. Norman had left.
I said, why would he do that? She said, people, drug money. I mean, He's just out of control. And then she starts to crying on the phone.
Norman's father said he had been concerned, but not too concerned. He figured that if his son had walked out, it was simply because he needed a little space.
We didn't go down there. We was like giving it some time. Maybe they had a fight or something.
The investigators weren't about to be as hands-off, though. After hearing the family's story, they decided it was high time they confronted Watasha.
We felt that we had gathered everything that we were going to gather without actually talking to her, and also we wanted to get into the house at that point.
So on November 26th,
When she pulled up to the house, we pulled up, asked if we could talk to her.
the investigators didn't tell her that her husband was dead, however. Instead, they led her to believe they were looking into a missing persons case.
We told her the guard asked us for assistance because your husband's missing. He didn't show up for drill. And we just talked to her about it and asked her if she would be willing to come back to the sheriff's office with us to talk about it.
She agreed. Didn't appear nervous, didn't appear upset about anything.
And she wasn't reluctant to talk about her husband either. Once in the interview room, Watasha told the investigators that in the past few months, their marriage had begun to fall apart.
He started hanging out with some guys or whatever, and he just started changing.
And according to Watasha, he was changing for the worse.
She said he was running around with a tough crowd.
That Norman was drinking a lot.
And that wasn't all she claimed that her husband had been doing.
I know he was on drugs.
Watasha told the investigators that between Norman's new friends and the fact that her husband was always high, the months of September and October had been a nightmare.
I'm falling out of love with him. I'm like, because he's like mentally abusing me, you know? And so it's really hard because for me, it being a pre-med and college student trying to graduate.
Watasha claimed that the final break had come just a few days shy of their second anniversary.
I came home from school and he was laying on the couch and he was just kind of like just messed up. And he was like watching some porn or something. And I was like, dude, I just can't, you know.
She claimed that she's a church-going person and but wouldn't be involved in this kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, we made 2 years we've been married. And I came home on the 24th. Like, he actually let to all his stuff.
She said that Norman took everything with him, and we asked, by everything, you mean like his ID, his clothes? She said, yep, he took everything.
Clothes, shoes, everything. Like, he even took food with him.
The investigators knew that this was a lie. They'd already found Norman's IDs in the garbage more than 2 weeks after they'd found his dismembered body, dumped along a lonely country road.
He got everything. Yeah. I didn't keep everything. I won't keep anything.
No. You know why? Because you threw it all out in your garbage. That's why we're here. We know where Norman's at.
We gave her the search warrant, told her that we were investigating the murder and that he in fact had been killed and his body had been dismembered.
Watasha took the news calmly.
Alright, you gotta find another person.
If she was scared or terrified, she didn't show it.
But she was through talking.
When she asked for an attorney, the decision was made to place her under arrest.
And when I looked into her eyes and told her that, her only response was, okay.
Coming up, at trial, a witness comes forward with shocking new allegations.
We were contacted by someone who actually had a class or two with Watasha.
And the defense makes a surprising claim.
The receipt had been purposefully placed there.
On March 26, 2014, Watasha Denton McCaster went on trial in Springfield, Illinois. The 24-year-old was charged with the 2012 murder and dismemberment of her husband, Norman McCaster.
Nothing about Watasha seemed to suggest that she was the type of person that would typically be charged with a crime, let alone a murder, particularly one this heinous.
At the time of her arrest, Watasha had been going to college, making good grades, and hoping to eventually go on to dental school.
Not only did she not have any criminal history, she had never even had any face-to-face interaction with law enforcement.
But when the prosecutors started presenting their case, they opened with a squeaky clean image of their own.
We started out with a picture of Norman up on the big screen for the jury to see, flag in the background in his uniform.
And if that wasn't enough to earn the jury's sympathy, the prosecution pointed out that in addition to being a model soldier, Norman had been a volunteer wrestling coach at a local school.
You know, oftentimes we have drug deals, maybe they go bad, or cases like that. This was a truly innocent victim.
Norman Castor was a good person.
But according to the prosecutor, he apparently wasn't good enough for Watasha. He told the jury that after her arrest, a search of the house had recovered Watasha's journals filled with complaints about her husband.
Journal entries that he needs to be more loving. He needs to care about me more. He needs to bring me roses, bring me flowers. Norman McCaster did not live up to this imagined husband that she was supposed to have.
The prosecutor claimed that another item recovered during the search showed that when her husband didn't live up to Watasha's expectations, she decided that he had to die.
When we did the search warrant of her house, there was a calendar. McCaster's wedding anniversary was October 26th. On that day on the calendar, someone had taken a black marker and just completely wiped out the date on the calendar, blacked it out.
The prosecutor said she was going to make sure they didn't get to that second anniversary.
And they didn't, because on October 25th,
he just disappeared.
In It's Open, the defense portrayed the prosecution's claims as far-fetched.
Most notably absent from the state's case was any believable motive, any believable explanation for why a woman 22 years old who was newly married to have committed a murder.
There was another, easier way to get out of her marriage, one she'd taken full advantage of, as the defense pointed out.
She had filed for divorce.
Of course, the divorce paperwork hadn't been filed until after Norman was dead. But according to the defense, Watasha didn't know that. Instead, they claimed that she had become so fed up with her husband's alleged drinking and drug use that she had kicked him out prior to going to the courthouse. In fact, they argued that Norman's drug abuse was why his dismembered body had ended up dumped on a country road.
If anyone were possibly responsible for this type of murder and this type of dismemberment, it was not a person like Watasha Denton, but rather it would be more understandably explained by other criminals who were dealing drugs.
The prosecution was ready for that assertion, though. When they started presenting their case, they called several witnesses who disputed Watasha's claim that Norman had a drug problem.
His squad leader at the National Guard said that Norman had passed several random drug tests, and there was no indication that he was using drugs.
In addition to regular drug tests by the Guard, Norman's autopsy had included a full toxicology screening, and the prosecution called a forensic pathologist to the stand to go over those findings.
The forensic pathologist tested his stomach fluid after the body was found and said there was no evidence of drugs.
There was no evidence of illegal drugs, that is, but a careful review of Norman's autopsy had revealed something that the original medical examiner missed.
Tetrahydrozoline was found in the victim's body, and it was very high levels, which in large amounts could possibly kill somebody.
And when the prosecutors asked the forensic pathologist just what tetrahydrozoline was, he gave what on the surface appeared to be an innocent-sounding answer. The active ingredient in Visine.
In one of the transcripts, there were numerous bottles of Visine that were in there.
Had Watasha poisoned her husband? According to a forensic computer expert the prosecutors called to the stand, Watasha's search history revealed that she may have at least tried.
Just search after search after search about, is Visine a poison?
And if that wasn't enough, Poison wasn't the only thing that Watasha had apparently been interested in either.
The forensic examination revealed numerous searches on hitmen in Springfield, how to get away with murder.
On cross, the defense did their best to contain the damage, arguing that as sensational as the computer searches were, they proved nothing.
The ultimate limitation when it comes to this type of evidence is that there is absolutely no way to know the identity of the person who pressed the keys that created the search.
And the Visine in Norman's system? According to the defense, the prosecution had no proof how it had gotten there.
That chemical can also enter the bloodstream through the mucous membranes in the eye.
In truth, even the prosecution doubted that Watasha had poisoned her husband. But that was only because they had a witness whose testimony would reveal just how Norman had died. The witness had come forward in December of 2012.
After Watasha had been arrested, we were contacted by someone who was a student at the University of Illinois in Springfield, who actually had a class or two with Watasha.
And when he took the stand, Watasha's classmate testified that she had come to him in October of 2012 with what sounded like an innocent request.
She asked if she could borrow a gun.
She indicated that her father was coming down and they were going to go shooting.
Her classmate told the jury that he'd thought nothing of her request at the time.
Sometime on the afternoon of October 24th, he did give her a gun.
Which is right in the time frame of when we believe she committed this murder.
Because less than 24 hours after Watasha borrowed her classmate's gun, her husband had disappeared. According to her classmate, she hadn't had the gun long either. He testified that Watasha had returned the gun the next day, October 25th, claiming that she no longer needed it.
She told him that she had purchased a gun.
But did that mean she hadn't used it?
She brought it back with 2 rounds missing.
And according to the prosecution, Watasha had most likely fired those 2 missing bullets into her husband's head.
The prosecutor said that's why Tasha got rid of his head, because she knew they was gonna find the evidence.
Unfortunately for the prosecution, that was only a theory.
We never found the head, so that was a problem in the case.
And as the defense was quick to point out on cross, that wasn't the only problem with the prosecution's theory.
The Illinois State Police Lab forensic scientists that reviewed the gun found that there was no evidence that the pistol had been fired.
But while the defense may have countered the state's claims about the borrowed gun, there were still plenty of strange coincidences to be explained. Like, why did Watasha buy a reciprocating saw on the night her husband disappeared? And how had the receipt for it ended up along this same remote stretch of road as her husband's body?
We felt that could be easily explained.
But it wouldn't be Watasha who gave the explanation. The defense declined to put her on the stand.
If she'd have got up there to testify, then that would have left her open to cross-examination.
Instead, the defense called Watasha's mother to counter the prosecution's claim that she bought the saw specifically to dismember her husband.
The purchase of the saw was not for anything nefarious or for anything sinister, but rather it was intended as a gift for her father.
And the bloody receipt found near the body.
It seemed unfathomable that Watasha would be so careless as to leave something so telling at the location of the body.
In fact, the defense claimed dropping the receipt wasn't a careless mistake at all. Instead, they wrapped their case by suggesting that it had been done on purpose.
The person who had really done this may have an interest in framing the person closest to him.
Coming up, the jury takes its time reaching a verdict.
The longer a jury deliberates, the greater the likelihood of a not guilty verdict.
And the outcome leaves the authorities and the family searching for an explanation.
I just ran out crying.
On April 1st, 1st, 2014, the jury in Watasha Denton McCaster's murder trial announced that it had reached a verdict. The 24-year-old was charged with murdering and dismembering her husband, 22-year-old Norman McCaster. And the jury had taken 7 long hours to reach their verdict.
The family of Norman Raymond McCaster I think they were getting a little concerned.
The longer a jury deliberates, the greater the likelihood of a not guilty verdict.
And when the verdict was read,
I was so nervous, just shaking. I couldn't stand still.
had the prosecution made their case? Or was the defense's claim that Watasha had been framed enough to raise reasonable doubt?
She was convicted of first-degree murder.
Much like her arrest, Watasha showed no emotion when the guilty verdict was read.
She didn't react at all.
For Norman's family, however, the verdict brought an overwhelming sense of relief.
I just ran out there in the hallway and just started crying.
At her sentencing on June 25th, Watasha received 55 years for murdering her husband and an additional 23 years for dismembering his body and concealing his death.
Illinois does not have the death penalty.
Although, under Illinois law,
on a first-degree murder conviction, the inmate serves the entire amount of time sentenced.
the fact that she could potentially be in prison for 78 years finally had an effect on Watasha. At her sentencing, she read a tearful statement to the court, one denying that she had anything to do with her husband's death.
She's never confessed to it, never taken responsibility for it.
And since Watasha has never admitted what she did, the authorities and his family will never fully understand why she did it.
Divorce him, leave him. Obviously, there are a lot of other things she could have done other than brutally murder him, but she was intent on killing him.
And she almost got away with it.
Had the body been taken 10 to 15 more feet where there was shrubs and bushes and trees, there's a good chance it never would have been detected.
Shreya Patel was everything a Hindu bride was supposed to be.
She is compliant. She is obedient.
Raised to be subservient.
A very traditional Indian girl.
Her husband, Bimal, on the other hand,
for all intents and purposes, was American.
An aspiring screenwriter.
The black sheep of the family.
One who, to please his parents, had agreed to an arranged marriage.
They had given him a list of names, and he could choose.
Bimal Patel chooses Shreya.
She is a gorgeous girl.
At first, the marriage appeared to be a success.
He was quite taken with her.
But it would end in a horrifying tragedy.
The flames scorched 60 to 80% of his body.
Witnesses heard him up there screaming.
Had the pressure to please his parents simply been too much?
He was looking possibly for a way out.
He said, "I feel as if I'm about to snap."
Or would the evidence point to a supposedly submissive bride?
He was shouting, "All I wanted to do was love you."
Austin, Texas, April 17, 2012. It was a quiet Tuesday in an immigrant neighborhood on the city's north side.
It's a community where a lot of the Indian community have set up.
It's a calm area, not a whole lot going on. It has a more suburban feel.
But then, at around 9:15, an off-duty sheriff's deputy heard something unusual coming from the balcony of a nearby apartment building. blood-curdling screams.
He looks up, and standing outside on a balcony, as he describes it, is a naked man who's obviously been burned and whose body is still smoking.
As soon as he recovered from the initial shock, the off-duty deputy dashed for the apartment building.
The off-duty deputy obviously took it upon himself to run over.
And once inside the building, he ran into a young woman rushing down the stairs.
She was clutching her purse and appeared to be on her way out.
She says, "I need to leave."
She wouldn't get the chance. Suspecting her haste had something to do with the badly burned man upstairs, the off-duty deputy detained her until the police arrived, which wouldn't be long. Several other neighbors had already called 911.
All the witnesses heard him up there screaming. All I was trying to do was love her.
To understand the tragedy, the investigators would have to delve deep into traditional Indian culture and the mind of a 25-year-old immigrant named Shreya Patel. Born in 1986, Shreya started life in one of India's largest cities. But when she was just a 1-year-old, her family moved to the United Arab Emirates.
Most of her life she actually spent in Dubai. She wasn't in India for very long at all.
It was a tough life so far from home, but it did offer her family far greater opportunities.
You're getting more money than you ever would in India.
Shreya's father got a factory job. Her mother did part-time seamstress work.
Very lower middle class, working family.
And Shreya's parents raised her in strict Hindu fashion.
She is a very traditional Indian girl.
Thanks to their higher-paying jobs in the Emirates, her parents had the money to make sure she stayed well connected to traditional Indian culture, too.
Shreya would go back to visit family on a pretty regular basis in India and maintained those Indian ties.
The family also saved up enough money to send Shreya to university back in India.
Education has a lot of value in Indian culture.
Although for a young woman like Shreya, the goal in earning a bachelor's degree in commerce wasn't necessarily to get a good job.
An education for a woman isn't as much about getting a career as it is about getting a husband.
That was really just to make her a more viable candidate for marriage. An Indian family's goal is to have the woman marry well.
And in the traditional Indian view, love never really enters into it.
She knew all along her parents would pick her husband.
And at 24, Shreya's parents told her it was high time she got married, before it was too late.
24 years old in Indian culture is actually kind of getting up there as far as marriageable years.
Meanwhile, halfway around the world, another family of Indian immigrants was thinking the same thing about their son, Bimal Patel. Like Shreya, Bimal hadn't grown up in India. He was born and raised in Amarillo, Texas, where his father had immigrated as a young man.
His father was the first Patel who had come over and immigrated and set up shop here.
But he was far from the last. Numerous brothers and cousins followed, and together they built a commercial empire.
These Patels have done very, very well.
They owned hotels.
And from a young age, Bimal was groomed to take his place in the family business.
There's an ongoing impetus to succeed if you're a Hindu. It is important.
But while he was a good Hindu boy at home, he grew up American, especially once he graduated from college and moved to Austin.
He lived a very American lifestyle.
He uses a lot of American vernacular, a lot of slang.
And despite the fact that his father had been grooming him to take over the family business, he had some very different dreams.
He was an aspiring screenwriter. He wanted to produce movies.
Not that he had much success. The aspiring filmmaker spent several years in Austin, struggling to get by.
He went through periods of unemployment. He worked as kind of a telemarketer.
That caused a very stressful relationship with his family.
He was the black sheep of the family. Parents weren't exactly thrilled with his direction in life.
And in 2011, his father told Bimal it was time for him to make amends.
Bimal's father decides that it is time for his son to follow in the traditions of Indian culture and find a wife.
And Bimal, as Americanized as he was, agreed.
He had seen arranged marriages work with his own family, and he wanted that kind of love between his parents, but he wasn't sure he could find it.
After carefully screening prospective brides on a website for arranged marriages, Bimal's father presented him with several pre-approved selections.
They had given him a list of names, and he could choose from them.
And one of those names was Shriya's.
She is one of 6 young women selected by Bimal's father.
And the 24-year-old was the only one of the 6 that caught his eye.
She is a gorgeous girl. She is just striking.
Bimal Patel chooses Shriya.
Bimal's parents approved. Shriya was exactly the sort of bride they wanted for their son.
Very quiet, very submissive.
And Shriya's parents were even more pleased by the possible match.
The Patels were financially well off.
So with blessings from both sets of parents, a meeting was arranged in India.
The first meeting of Shriya and Bimal was basically a big party. That's one of the traditions that happens during matchmaking.
And judging from that first meeting, the match appeared to be a success.
They talked all night.
He was quite taken with her.
In fact, Bimal confided as much to a friend.
He said that before he met Shriya, he wasn't really sure whether an arranged marriage could work, but that something just changed when he met her. He really liked her, that they talked all night.
Bimal and Shriya spent the next month in India, going on what, by the strict rules of traditional Hindu courtship, passed for dates.
The dating process is a very supervised one. It's not dating as any American would know it. There's no kissing, there's no holding hands, there's no touching. You are never alone.
However, despite their lack of physical intimacy, Bimal told friends that he felt a real connection with Shriya.
A friend said that he was elated that he had met someone who was a lot like him, even though she was born in India.
Although, for all his excitement, he was torn.
He really wanted things to work with Shriya, but the American part of him didn't want to force her.
So Bimal took what was, for an arranged marriage, an unusual step.
He asked his father to ask her whether she would be willing to marry him.
Shriya said yes, and on February 6, 2011, the couple married in a traditional ceremony in India.
The wedding was actually quite lavish. I mean, people lavishly dressed, sumptuously fed, and a quite beautiful spectacle.
But the bride and groom wouldn't be together long. Shortly after the honeymoon, Bimal returned to Austin to start the immigration process required to bring his new bride home.
It was a year-long process. It was very stressful.
Shriya was still in India.
It was only on April 12, 2012, more than a year after their wedding, that Shriya finally arrived in Bimal's Austin apartment.
It was a very modest one-bedroom apartment.
And a mere 5 days later, Bimal would be out on the balcony of that same apartment, screaming in agony. Coming up, while her husband is rushed to the hospital, Shriya faces tough questions.
She was very fearful of the whole process.
Including the toughest question of all. Why?
In Indian culture, losing your virginity before marriage is something you just don't do.
On April 17, 2012, it had been 5 days since Shriya Patel had flown to Austin, Texas, to be reunited with her husband, Bimal.
It took about a year to go through the red tape, to get the passports, the visas, all that, to bring Shriya over to the United States.
The couple had been married a year earlier in a traditional arranged marriage.
Shriya and Bimal were married in India.
And despite her arranged marriage, Shriya appeared ready to make the best of it.
She grew up in a very, very traditional Indian home. It was explained to her from the time she was little bitty that it would be an arranged marriage.
But that night, at a little after 9 p.m., emergency personnel rushed to Bimal's apartment. Several neighbors had just called in reporting that a badly burned man was on the balcony outside, screaming in agony.
Witnesses said that they saw a man screaming, "All I wanted to do was love you."
Police and EMTs were on the scene within minutes.
The apartment is just filled with smoke.
The smell of gasoline was overwhelming.
And collapsed on the living room floor was Beamel.
When police and firefighters arrive at the apartment, Beamel is still smoking.
And he was covered with severe burns.
The flames scorched between 60 to 80% of his body.
He had lost a lot of his fingers and toes from the fire.
Incredibly, despite his injuries, Beamel was still alive. But he was in such grave danger that as soon as the EMTs transported him to the hospital, his doctors had to resort to desperate measures.
They pretty much put him in a coma, just pretty much full of morphine and knocked out to deal with the pain.
And then they requested backup.
He's brought to the military burn unit in San Antonio, which happens to be the best burn unit in the world.
While Beamel was en route to the burn unit, the investigators turned to Shreya for answers. The 25-year-old had been stopped on the stairs moments before the police arrived, apparently while attempting to flee the scene, and detained by one of the Patel's neighbors.
He was an off-duty Travis County Sheriff's officer.
That night, while forensic techs went to work in Beamel and Shreya's apartment, the investigators brought her into headquarters for questioning.
She was very fearful of the whole process.
And apparently with good reason.
She was only here for 5 days before this happened.
Asked how her husband got hurt, Shreya didn't offer any details, although she did blame Beamel.
She didn't say anything more than my husband did this to himself.
She says that he wanted to commit suicide.
Was it possible Shreya was telling the truth? Sitting in the tiny interrogation room with her, the investigators couldn't help but notice a few things that suggested Shreya hadn't been involved in the fire. For starters, despite the fact that the entire apartment had been choked with gasoline fumes.
Why doesn't she smell like gas?
No singed hair. Nothing. Her clothes don't smell like smoke. Nothing is burned.
And yet, the investigators had a hard time accepting Shreya's claim that Beamel's burns were the result of a suicide attempt.
That's not, I think, anybody's preferable way to take their own life. It just seems like one of the worst ways you can do it.
However, when the investigators pressed for more information, Shreya not only refused to talk, the recent immigrant showed a surprising grasp of the American legal process.
She asked for a lawyer. She said, I just really don't want to answer these questions without a lawyer.
The investigators stopped the interview, but they didn't release Shreya. Instead, they held her in custody while they completed their investigation.
She's obviously in a very confused state. She's very disoriented. She's never been in jail before.
With Shreya refusing to talk, the investigators were forced to rely on forensics to piece together what had happened inside the apartment that night. Not that it was easy, but the apartment still filled with smoke and gasoline fumes.
They were afraid there might be a subsequent explosion.
They had to open up windows and everyone had to back out.
When the smoke and fumes cleared, the crime scene investigators determined that the fire that burned Beamel had been confined to the apartment's tiny bathroom, and that the blaze had been short, but intense.
The plastic fixtures in the room were melted.
However, the fire didn't appear to be all that had been confined within the bathroom. Damage to the bathroom door suggested that Beamel had been trapped inside, too.
He had to kick the bottom of the door out because he couldn't get the door open.
Just outside the door, crime scene investigators found a 2-gallon gas can and a white bucket.
And there's a blue cup within that.
Both the bucket and the cup smelled of gasoline. Elsewhere, the investigators found more evidence of materials they believed to be connected to the blaze.
They found a Walmart receipt in the house, and the receipt showed that a lighter, candles, and a rope had been purchased.
One of the candles was on the edge of the bathtub, and the other one was sitting on the bathroom counter.
Finally, the investigators found more evidence that the fire had been deliberately set.
The smoke detector had been disabled.
The sprinklers had been covered with dark blue cloth and plastic and tape.
Based upon what they found in the apartment, the investigators began to piece together a theory about how the fire had occurred.
They believed that some candles had been burning inside the room and that she had kind of lured him in there.
And as the investigators told the local news that night, they based that assumption on more than just the state of the crime scene. As it turned out, the accusation had come from Biemel himself. When the police and EMTs arrived in the apartment that evening, Biemel hadn't just been alive. He'd been conscious and talking. And just before he was transported to the hospital and placed into a coma, he'd made some shocking allegations against Shreya.
He says that Shreya had lured him into the bathtub with the promise of a sensual massage.
He remembers oil being poured on him, and then he was in flames.
What appeared had happened was Biemel had been laying in the bathtub, and there was a candle burning on the edge. And Shreya had opened the door, thrown the cup of gasoline at him, and shut the door immediately.
But if Shreya had expected him to die in the bathroom, as the police believed, the plan had gone awry.
It's fairly obvious from the patterns that are evident on the door that he kicked his way out that door and then somehow came outside.
He had not only come outside, but also called for help and accused his wife of trying to kill him.
He did make some comments to the fire and EMS crews about why did she burn me, why did she burn me? All I was trying to do was love her.
And coupled with the evidence inside the apartment, those comments convinced the police to place Shreya under arrest.
Patel has been charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, family violence, a first-degree felony.
There was right away an assumption that this was exactly what it seemed to be, a woman trying to kill her husband in one of the most brutal ways anybody can think of.
And as shocking as the case was, the fact that Shreya was a recent immigrant brought to the States by an arranged marriage made it all the more mysterious.
It's so exotic. It is a different world.
But did those exotic circumstances explain why Shreya committed such a horrible act?
She may not have been very happy with that marriage.
Or would those same cultural differences end up explaining her innocence? Coming up, will Biemel live to tell his side of the story?
He spent 5 months fighting for his life.
Or will a shocking secret explain everything?
He didn't want her.
On the morning of April 18, 2012, 25-year-old Shreya Patel sat in an Austin, Texas jail cell. The recent Indian immigrant had been charged with aggravated assault after allegedly setting fire to her husband the night before.
Just a bizarre set of circumstances that I don't think we've seen around here ever.
That same morning, her husband, 29-year-old Biemel Patel, was in a San Antonio burn unit where he'd been airlifted overnight.
60 to 80% of Biemel's body is burned.
And unfortunately for the investigators, he was in no shape to talk.
He was in a coma.
Shreya wasn't talking either. All the police had gotten out of her prior to her arrest was a brief statement blaming the fire on Biemel.
She did say from the get-go, my husband did this to himself.
Were Biemel's injuries the result of a suicide attempt? The investigators were dubious.
People just can't imagine somebody trying to commit suicide by burning themselves to death.
And then there was the fact that a neighbor, who just happened to be an off-duty sheriff's deputy, had caught Shreya fleeing the scene.
He rushed up the stairs and ran into Shreya, who appeared to be on her way out.
However, Shreya hadn't exactly been caught red-handed. Despite the fact that police believed she had set her husband on fire, there was no trace of gasoline on her hands or clothes, and not even a single hair was singed.
How does she walk away completely unscathed if she did that final act?
To lock up their case, the police needed physical evidence that connected Shreya to the crime, and they hoped a clue from the scene would provide the crucial link. a Walmart receipt for a lighter, candles, rope, and cloth.
The materials used to cover the sprinkler heads in the apartment.
But was it Shreya who made the purchases? The next day, the investigators contacted the Walmart the receipt originated from and reviewed the security footage.
The Walmart security camera showed Shreya buying the candles.
And the lighter, rope, and cloth.
They even found the video of her buying the gas can.
The evidence is there. You see her on the security footage at Walmart.
And forensic testing of all those items further strengthened the link to Shreya.
You have her fingerprints all over the tape and the candles and the gas can and the plastic that covered the sprinklers.
The investigators found more fingerprint evidence on the bucket and the cup they believed was used to toss the gasoline into the bathroom.
Her fingerprints are all over that.
And if that wasn't enough, the investigators also canvassed the gas stations between the Walmart and the crime scene, screening their security footage for the night of the fire, and at a station just down the street.
You see her on the security footage at the gas station.
The footage showed Shreya arriving at a gas station in a taxi cab, getting out to fill the 2-gallon can she had just purchased, and then, after paying for it, getting back in the taxi and heading for home.
She went out, she bought these materials, and she bought them on her own.
But while the evidence clearly suggested that Shreya had coolly and carefully plotted her attempt on Beemel's life, the investigators still struggled with one question. Why?
Right away, the cultural questions did come up.
And most of those questions centered on the unique set of circumstances that had brought Shreya to the United States.
She was in an arranged marriage. She'd only been here a few days.
Could her arranged marriage have sparked the attempt on Beemel's life? The investigators suspected it was possible, but they were also well aware that they were out of their depth.
An arranged marriage was something a lot of people around here, I don't think, can relate with.
So the investigators spent the next several days questioning Beemel's friends and family about both his marriage to Shreya and arranged marriages in general. And they discovered it wasn't Shreya who had the most reservations about their brokered marriage. It was Beemel.
Beemel was a very reluctant groom.
For starters, the 29-year-old telemarketer and aspiring screenwriter wanted to be more established and stable, able to support a family.
He wasn't making a ton of money. I don't see why he would want to get married.
And when he did, friends said the American-born Beemel longed for an American-style marriage, not a traditional Indian one.
He wanted to be equals with his wife. He wanted to be partners with her rather than being her superior.
And most of all, he wanted to marry someone who chose him, not someone who was chosen for him.
He wanted love and dedication.
However, according to his friends, Beemel's objections had melted away once he traveled to India and met Shreya.
He felt that he'd found a good woman.
He just fell in love.
But did Shreya feel the same way? Beemel's friends weren't so sure.
Unfortunately, that feeling wasn't reciprocated.
They questioned whether Shreya was actually in love with him.
And when the investigators contacted Shreya's family in the United Arab Emirates, they seconded the assessment. Not that it mattered in their minds. They remained steadfast in their belief that Beemel was a good match for Shreya.
Shreya's family saw this family with wealth. They thought that they were setting their daughter up for success.
She's marrying up. There's no question that this is a prominent, wonderful family.
And as far as they knew, Shreya hadn't appeared to have any reservations about their arranged marriage.
She is a very traditional, very submissive, very quiet girl.
And even if she wasn't in love with Beemel yet, he was a good match. And those feelings could come in time. After all, her own mother and father's marriage had been arranged too.
While I doubt that Beemel was the man of her dreams, I think she was doing her part in accepting her parents' guidance.
To be a good wife, as is the standard or the culture in India, this is something that would be expected of her.
Shreya had come to accept that this is what was going to happen.
But if that was the case, how had Bimal ended up severely burned? According to one witness, Shriya's real motive for marrying him may have provided a clue. The story came from two of Bimal's closest friends, a college classmate and his wife. They'd traveled to India for the week-long wedding festivities.
The friends described the party, the very lavish wedding.
However, according to Bimal's friends, one thing had put a damper on the occasion.
Shriya seemed withdrawn, not particularly happy.
And the wife of Bimal's friend claimed that Shriya had even confessed why she was unhappy.
She claims that Shriya confided in her, saying that she had lost her virginity to another man.
It was a shocking admission, considering the circumstances.
In Indian culture, losing your virginity before marriage is something you just don't do. And if you do it, it brings immense shame to your family.
However, according to Bimal's friend, Shriya hadn't just given her virginity to her lover. She claimed that Shriya had also given him her heart.
She was actually in love with him.
So why get engaged to Bimal if she loved another? Shriya supposedly told his friend it was because her previous lover had broken off their relationship.
She was only marrying Bimal to make the other man jealous, and then he would come after her.
That he would want her back.
But according to Bimal's friend, that hadn't happened.
He didn't want her back, and he didn't react.
Devastated by her lover's rejection, Shriya had gone through with the wedding. And a year later, she'd found herself in the United States, trapped in a marriage to a man she didn't love.
Here's this woman who's kind of a stranger in a strange land, thrown into a foreign world.
And that upset Shriya.
Even worse, instead of marrying into a rich family as her parents had promised, Shriya discovered that while his parents had money, Bimal didn't.
You come here and you're expecting your husband to, shower you with all these things, gifts and money and cars and a home and children, and she wasn't getting any of that.
Had her desperate situation driven her to an equally desperate act? The authorities were convinced.
You had this woman who was seemingly trying to set her husband on fire and kill him.
But would she succeed? By September of 2012, as Shriya sat in jail, her husband was still in the burn unit.
He spent 5 months in Brooke Army Medical Center fighting for his life.
And on September 8th, he lost the fight.
After 5 months, Bimal finally succumbs to his injuries.
And while he had regained consciousness at times, he couldn't remember what had happened the night of the fire.
He was never able to explain what happened.
Not that it mattered to the authorities. Based on all the evidence they had already gathered, they quickly filed a new indictment against Shriya.
The same day that Bimal dies, Shriya is charged with murder.
Coming up, will a previously overlooked piece of evidence exonerate Shriya?
I know of no sensual massages that have that as an element.
Or will another reveal the real reason Bimal died?
He said, I feel as if I'm about to snap.
On March 4th, 2014, Shriya Patel went on trial at the Travis County Courthouse. It had been a year and a half since her husband Bimal had died from severe burns suffered in the couple's Austin, Texas apartment.
Bimal was in the hospital from the date of the incident through September when he finally passed.
Since Bimal had died, the charges against Shriya had been upgraded from felony assault to capital murder. And while the state had decided not to pursue a possible death sentence against the 27-year-old Indian immigrant, the penalty, if convicted, was still harsh.
It's automatic life without the possibility of parole.
In its opening statement, the prosecution claimed that Shriya had set her husband on fire because she was desperate to get out of their arranged marriage.
They felt that she had plenty of motivation to kill Beamel.
The basic gist of the state's case, the prosecution against Shreya, was that she had married a man with a certain expectation. When she got to America, those expectations weren't met. She thought he was wealthy. It turned out his family was wealthy, but he wasn't.
And when they started presenting their case, the prosecutor had plenty of evidence that appeared to fit their theory of how the crime occurred.
The prosecutors were contending that Shreya lured her husband into the bathroom for a sensual massage, doused him with gasoline, and lit him on fire.
He says she filled a large plastic cup with gasoline and then threw it across the bathroom into the tub where the candles are burning.
They had receipts and surveillance video documenting how she'd purchased materials in preparation for the murder.
They tried to show that Shreya did go to Walmart. She didn't buy these materials on her own.
The state believed this showed a lot of premeditation on her part as an intent to kill.
The investigators had also found Shreya's fingerprints on a gas can, bucket, and cup at the scene.
They were able to tie her fingerprints to a few of the items used to set this fire.
And finally, and perhaps most damning of all, the prosecutors called the off-duty sheriff's deputy who witnessed the fire's horrifying aftermath to the stand.
When he gave his testimony, the courtroom was silent.
Especially when he described Beamel's agonized, final screaming accusation against Shreya.
He was screaming and shouting that his wife had set him on fire.
Surveillance video, fingerprints, and a direct accusation from the victim. The case against Shreya looked pretty airtight.
At first glance, if you look at this case from the outside, it may seem obvious that Shreya is guilty.
But according to the defense, it looked very different from the inside. They opened their case by sticking to Shreya's initial claim that her husband's injuries were self-inflicted.
Shreya's story is that Beamel wanted to commit suicide.
And all the evidence the prosecution was counting on to explain how she had carefully prepared the attack. The receipts, fingerprints, and surveillance video, according to the defense, they only proved that Shreya had simply been following her husband's orders.
He enlisted her help to do it.
But why go along with it? According to the defense, it was all about Indian culture.
Because she was a submissive wife, did as she was asked.
Women were expected to be obedient. They were expected to abide by the rules laid out by their husbands.
She certainly helped him, and that would have been her function within this family.
According to the defense, Beamel had full knowledge of her preparations. In fact, they claimed that the way the apartment's smoke detectors and sprinklers had been wrapped and disabled made it impossible for him not to know.
It's as obvious as soon as you walk in, you can't help but look at this blue tape and fabric hanging down from the ceiling.
And the prosecution's claim that Shreya had tossed nearly 2 gallons of gasoline across the bathroom before slamming the door shut. The defense argued that the burn patterns in the bathroom made that impossible.
This is an immaculate throw. All of the gasoline lands in the tub, and only in the tub. Only in the tub to a forensic certainty.
Which meant it could only have one source, according to the defense.
He sat there and he poured it on himself.
And they claimed there was an overlooked piece of evidence that proved it. Something the EMTs noted as they rushed Beamel to the hospital.
He has cotton wadded into his nose.
I know of no sensual massages that have that as an element.
If he was expecting a sensual massage, why would he plug his nose with cotton balls?
But according to the defense, it made perfect sense if Beamel had known what was coming.
Because he was dousing himself with gas and, the smell just permeates. I think he did that just to be able to carry this off.
But why would Beamel want to kill himself? Once again, the defense claimed that the answer lay within Indian culture. And to explain how, they called a sociology professor from the University of Texas to the stand.
We thought a jury might have a hard time understanding how different this culture is. She was brought on to kind of educate everybody.
Key to the defense's explanation was the intense pressure on Bimal to get married.
And if you get to be about 27 years old and you're a Hindu and you're unmarried, it casts a poor light on the family.
But getting married did little to ease the strain.
In India, arranged marriage is about a financial transaction.
And Bimal was expected to hold up his end of the bargain.
The man is supposed to be the major breadwinner.
You're supposed to take care of your family. You're the protector, you're the provider.
But according to the defense, Bimal wasn't any of that. He was an aspiring screenwriter, scraping by with a telemarketing job.
This was just a man that was kind of at the end of his rope.
And once Shreya arrived in the United States, his last chance at a romantic Hollywood ending to his story had quickly vanished.
He's devastated when he realizes that she doesn't love him. And I think that was the final straw for them all.
He was looking for a way out, and suicide was the answer.
At least that was the defense's theory, and they claimed to have evidence to back it up. Bimal's cell phone records. Specifically, they pointed to a series of morbid-sounding text messages he'd sent to friends in the weeks leading up to his death.
One text that we provided to the jury was only a few weeks before he would die.
And the content of that message was telling, according to the defense.
It said, "I feel like a branch on a tree that is weighted down. I feel as if I'm about to snap."
Was it possible Bimal had killed himself? That Shreya was merely doing as she had been told? That's what the defense claimed. In fact, one witness even said she had tried to stop him. The witness was the cab driver who'd driven Shreya to the gas station.
When the taxi driver was questioned, he said that he had picked Shreya up from Walmart and she wanted to go to the police station.
Although according to the cab driver, she had struggled with the decision, reversing herself more than once.
Shreya changed her mind and went to the gas station instead, but then wanted to go to the police station again, changed her mind one more time and went home.
Because in the end, according to the defense, she felt that she had no choice.
Here's this woman who is raised to be subservient in her culture.
She felt that she was obeying her husband's wishes.
And she's not thinking that she can disobey.
And the defense claimed that made Shreya innocent of murder, even if it was a tough thing for Americans to understand.
That acquiescence is many hundreds of years old. And that's India, and it's Hindus.
Coming up, the defense finally offers its take on Bimal's last words.
He was simply attributing cause.
But will their efforts be enough to raise reasonable doubt?
We, the jury, find the defendant
On March 10th, 2014, the jury in Shreya Patel's murder trial announced it had reached a verdict. The 27-year-old Indian immigrant was charged with setting fire to her husband, Bimal, in their Austin, Texas apartment.
Just the nature of it was very shocking. A woman setting her husband on fire in a bathtub.
At trial, the defense claimed that Shreya hadn't set fire to her husband, that he had committed suicide, distraught that their arranged marriage was a sham.
She is compliant. She is obedient. But you can't buy love. You can't manufacture love. You can't say to another person, love me.
And in their close, the defense even claimed that Bimal's despair explained his final words.
Why did she do this to me? I only wanted her to love me. The police wanted to mean she killed me. I think he was simply attributing cause. Why did she do this to me? Why did she disappoint me? Why did she make me kill myself? I only wanted her to love me.
But would the jury agree?
We, the jury, find the defendant, Shreya Biman Patel, guilty.
The jury found Shreya guilty, but not of murder. Instead, the jurors opted for a lesser charge.
She was found guilty of arson causing death. Obviously, the jury didn't buy all of what the prosecution had to say.
And the sentence they settled on was far less than the mandatory life in prison the prosecutors had sought.
We, the jury, assess the defendant's punishment at confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for a term of 20 years.
The defense considered the outcome a victory.
If the state had sold their theory, she would have died in prison.
And while it wasn't the acquittal she had hoped for, Shreya felt vindicated.
She was obviously very happy that they listened to her side of it.
Even if it was a tough story for most Americans to hear or even understand.
It challenged cultural notions. It pushed a lot of people out of their comfort zones.
Is it really true that she would absolutely obey a husband? I mean, to the point of going out to gathering materials to help him kill himself? And the answer is yes. That's what she did. And that's what the jury believed.
See that? Never seen amazing. I